Yeah.
We need to get started, so welcome everybody. Appreciate you being here, especially our guests that will be presenting to us and helping us tonight. So are we ready to have the forestry department? Are we good to go on that, or we want to wait?
I don't know where Bree is, but I could probably answer 99.9% of your questions, but I can text her and see where she's at.
What, you can do that, because we cannot go be any sooner, because we're not going to talk about dark sky tonight, the lighting ordinance, because I'm not.
You're not ready yet.
Well, I got to add a couple of tweaks, a little bit about flagpole lighting and a couple of things, vertical lighting and stuff, and then I'm going to send it to Shay for his review, and then try to get in front of the planning commission and us next time we
Have we decided on, are we gonna light the sign, the city sign down there at the, that is nice having that moved down there.
Nice, isn't it? That's good, doesn't it?
Yeah, that looks good. That's a nice spot for it.
Yeah.
But,
And we're running conduit down there and electricity, and
I was gonna check with,
you know,
okay.
if we don't end up with solar instead, you know.
Yeah, solar would be good.
Solar would be good.
Yeah.
So actually, if it permanently attaches to something,
Yeah.
just walk off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's, got mounted in some concrete there too.
Okay.
Yeah, they're getting,
You can kind of,
they're developing a lot bigger and better thing, or smaller and better things for solar.
All right.
There now.
If you want to go, from what I understand, your discussion is in designating a movie area to be, that's what Jim kind of mentioned.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
wildlands.
so,
Yeah. Trying to understand the fire risk and how that relates to the urban fire wildfire
Wildlands
interface zone.
yeah,
That's kind of what we're trying to use this information to establish our boundary.
okay, yeah, because what
Right.
it is what the, part of the Senate bill and requirements is, you need to, the city needs to adopt an ordinance related to wildland fire, but it doesn't have to be the whole city. What you have to do is designate an area that's realistic, and then we, as a division, approve, and usually it's me that ends up doing that. You know, if you have a center section that's all been developed and it's all streets and everything, you know, all green grasses and stuff, you know, so most of the communities, it's in the outer banks or the outer areas of it. Some cities, it is the whole city. If there's a lot of vegetation. Because one of the things about wildland fire, well, from personal experience, a week ago Tuesday, I ate a lot of smoke as we were fighting fire in the middle of Uinta Highlands in there. And that was right in the middle of the fire raced right through. It wasn't just the outer, it went through the middle. So what you'd want to evaluate is, realistically, is look at your community, look at what your actual risks are to wildland fire, and then you need to just designate it. And if you do the whole city, that's fine. If you do the outer things, just take a serious look at it, and then as a community, you just adopt ordinances that relate to, and again, it's the minimum parts about the wildland urban area code. You don't necessarily have to sprinkler homes, but if there's water supply issues, no hydrants or any of that kind of things, a lot of areas have used sprinklers that move up water supply. So there's ways that you can evaluate and apply the code. So probably the first step is to actually take a look at your risk and evaluate your
Yeah, that's what
community.
kind of, we actually have a code, we actually have passed ordinance that basically says we're gonna require fire or sprinklers in homes in that wildlife boundary, right outside that, in that area. And we actually already have a boundary defined, but we wanna make sure that we look at the fire risks and what your recommendations are, how we should analyze this data, and then apply it appropriately and reestablish those boundaries.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the more you can enlighten us and guide us in that, that'd be great.
That's probably where Bree, because I haven't really evaluated your community, so I haven't done a, on-site. That's usually the best way is, I know we have these risk assessment maps and stuff, but in driving the fire department and their driving, what have they actually observed? What is the development like in your areas? A good way to describe it is if you go into an area and drive around, 99% of us, we get that gut feeling, this area, and what you look at when you do assessments, and what we do when we do structure triage, if there's an actual fire, we look at the structure, we look at the vegetation, we look at what we could expect the fire behavior when a fire runs through there, what kind of available resources and how soon we could get them, and then we make a determination of what that risk is. And that's the visual risk. That's what I actually do if a fire is coming to threaten the community. That's what I will look at. I go around and look at the structure. So when you're building codes, you know, what kind of, you know, do you allow wood shake roofs or do you have Class A roofs? You know, what is in your code? What's the siding requirements? Do you have them, do they enclose the decks down to the ground? Do they enclose the eaves? Do they vent the screens? You know, the code part of it. If you guys are doing that, we'll see that when we look at that. And then do you have any vegetation requirements on what kind of defensible space do you allow? So if you've addressed all that, then so you've done 90% of what really needs to be done when you go look at your risk assessment. You know, because the risk assessment model is done on, you know, satellite imagery and stuff that's been done a couple years ago, so it's not current right this today.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're driving up here, I notice you know, you got a lot of, you're a developing community. That's what you are. So what currently is your designated WUI area?
Show you that. Just to let you know too, as I was talking to Brianne about this, she said the risk assessment map here was last updated in 2008.
Okay.
So there's been a lot of change here between then. Okay. So our boundary covers. We have it on the north end of the city. We have this road that's called Loafer Canyon Road, and there's a hillside along there that's sparsely developed that comes right down off the mountains, and so our boundary covers the hillside and Loafer Canyon Road, and then it swings. Just looking at this really quickly, it swings up here and then starts to cover this hillside on this side also, because that's undeveloped, and then it cuts across, comes down through an area that's currently undeveloped again, coming down off the mountainside to basically following along this road here, and coming down and wrapping around the golf course area.
Yeah.
So that's what and this boundary was designated in 1996.
Yeah,
Is that when
that's a long time
the
ago.
ordinance was put in place? So it's been a long time since. There's been a lot of development that's occurred. A lot of changes have occurred since then. Just to give you a little history, this is the oldest part of the city. This was constructed in the 1970s, 1980s. Then things spread out from there in different directions. So the boundary at the time that it was set, it really, you know, bypassed the part of town that was in place at that time, and everything else was at that time pretty open.
Okay, one of
Yeah,
those.
and it's interesting because I live in that gray area right there, and which is not it's not in the wildland boundary, right? It's in this-
Correct.
I don't know how
On the
to
current
describe it.
boundary, it isn't.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, if we have a forest fire, my house is burning.
Possibility.
Good possibility.
Mine's going down with yours.
Yours is going down too.
Traffic and so
Yours-
is horrible. I
just-
can't believe I made it this
I look
far.
at it, it's that smell test, right? It's that you stand there and you look and like,
Well,
I'm,
One of the,
it's besides my green yard, it's all filled and forest across from me, and it's all filled and forest behind me,
yeah, all oak brush.
you know?
And Forest Service boundary is kind of at the base of the mountain. here. That-
One of the
Anyway, that was just a side
Yeah,
note,
one
but
of the things that you can do is, since you are in that stage of super development, is if you actually designate everything as wildland urban interface, and then as part of your development review process, as developments are coming in, you put it on the developer to mitigate if they don't want to follow your WUI code and they want to minimize things. Well, part of the development, well, if you do these kind of shaded field breaks or roads or whatever, and have it as part of their approval process, mitigation things to take it out of that high hazard assessment, you know. And that's always an option, and that's a safe way of doing it, because then that doesn't put it on you as to, you know, because you're right, your community is such that almost your whole community, you know, we proved it last week that a fire can race through even the middle. You know, we were burning houses down that were in the middle of the subdivisions, not on the edge that you typically think. So thinking, well, if we just put it on the edge and every time the edge moves that we adjust it to the edge, is not always the best avenue to take, because the potential is there, especially when it's wind driven, because the biggest threat in a wildland fire in reality is the ember storms that come before the fire actually reaches a home. And the interesting thing is last week they had embers jump the Columbia River and start fire across the Columbia River, which is wider than, well, in the other, last week I watched the fire race right across I-84, like, you know, and you're not gonna have those kind of fire
they'll
breaks.
jump and those embers will get sucked into your eaves and around your
So-
corners of your houses and.
Yeah, and I don't know, Bree, if you were doing some study on what you were looking at, if potential for a designated area.
Well, the thing to think about, you know, is you're in a unique position to really catch this and nip it in the bud on the front end. Because in a lot of communities, we're really playing catch up. You know, they're being grandfathered into these WUI areas. And the building and vegetation as such was kind of, you know, from 20 years ago where there weren't any restrictions, plant whatever you want, it's kind of a free-for-all. But, and this is just a jumbo version of that, but the risk assessment you see there is a function of threat and effect. So is the fire gonna happen? And if it does, what kind of damage is it going to cause? So we're looking at your values at risk, like your homes, businesses, anything that's gonna cost somebody a lot of money to replace. So as you continue to build into these areas, that's one, your fire history is gonna change the potential risk, right? The more fires you get, well, this is a fire prone area, but two, you put expensive things in wild places, that's just gonna drive up the risk as well. So if you could get out ahead of it, making the builders kind of adhere to all the much higher building codes, and the other part, the vegetation management, people can't miss a tree or a shrub they never had to begin with. So from our standpoint, because that's what I do is help with the fire planning and the fuels management, they don't know any better when they move into this nice development. You've got a nice, well-built, up-to-code home with vegetation that follows our fire-wise, so to speak, prescriptions of being less ignitable, you know, in the instance of a fire. So you have great potential to really build sort of a fire-wise or fire-safe, future-developed community. You know, you can always maybe retract the boundaries, but once you say this is just our tiny little WUI area, it'll probably be an uphill battle to expand it. So that would be my recommendation, because you really got a lot of potential here to build. You know, especially as you look into Loafer Canyon and some of the other areas. The Forest Service
Feel free to come
boundary-
up and
Yeah,
point
sorry.
and talk and
Sorry, I'm late.
make
The
yourself
drive from
at
Salt
home.
Lake is just brutal. Sometimes I wish there was a train that just came all the way down here. This is Mega Map, so you can maybe see this a little bit better. And this one you guys can keep as well. So in these patches, there's kind of how you're impacting Woodland Hills. The forest boundary is right around here. There's actually a chunk of property in here that the state owns, I believe, with Sitla. And over here, there's another chunk that might be a wildlife management area, so there's opportunities to collaborate, and especially with Woodland Hills on some of your Loafer Canyon areas. So, sorry, kind of blocking. But this little mini map down here just kind of focuses on, oh goodness, I'm like a bull in a china shop, sorry guys. I was just working at the state fair today, so it's going from, hey kids, to, hey everybody.
It's all good.
So you can kind of see right here, the red here doesn't necessarily mean your risk, but it just kind of maps your housing density. So X number of houses per acre. So this right here is one of those functions that calculates your total risk. So as you start continuing to build up towards some of these areas, and if Loafer Canyon ever goes from just recreation, vacation homes to a real little community up there, you might see some of this red being pushed out. And I think we had touched on it a little bit via email. 2008 data, we all know that Utah has the fastest growing population in the country. So as our risk assessment data gets updated, which it's slated to this year, we just got the next round of funding, this map might change anyway to reflect some more red areas, in which case, let's say more development starts happening and it just pushes your red out, it would probably be a good idea just to include that all in your WUI area. Because then Dave and I don't have to fight the uphill battle of convincing people to do vegetation management, because it's already incorporated in there. And we've actually got a good list of recommendations too that can be passed on to your planning and zoning folks, and to any of the builders as well, to kind of incorporate that in there, because it just saves everybody money up front if we can do that compared to after the fact where we're having to go through. The nice part is as you're continuing to build, the impact is already there. I mean, you've already got a blade on the ground, the disturbance is there, you've got an SWPP in place, so let's just throw some new landscaping in there. I'm a big fan of that, because sometimes that's one of our things, is trying to go back and convince people a little later. Woodland Hills, we work with those guys a lot. We've got a grant there. It's kind of the same thing, they've kind of gotten attached to the way things look, so we're just trying to help modify some of that vegetation up there, but if you guys do it first, an example.
So Bree, you mentioned that kind of yellow area at the bottom of the map would likely become red if it gets developed. What about at the top of the map? That's mostly where all our current development is happening.
Yep.
It's right there, yep. That's like all being developed. I mean, would that push the red down there or no, because they're kind of more off the mountain?
That's probably going to stay the way it is.
Okay.
And largely that can be attributed to the fuel modeling layer. So most of what you had in there was close to urban development, your grass, and even the grass loads there before the homes were built were just some of your light, flashier fuels that are still a huge risk. But since you guys have been developing and there's more hydrants there, and you're closer to, that doesn't show it, but the distance to your firehouse is a little bit closer as well. So a lot of these things, there's about 30 different data layers or 40 that go into calculating what the total risk is. So right here, especially much more dense vegetation, topography, Loafer, nice steep on both sides, and you've got to worry with the down canyon wind. So our modeling takes all that into account. And the other thing you're looking at here, you've got a lot of loop roads. People can get out of here if they need to be evacuated. But some of these situations where you see you've got heavy fuels, one way in, one way out, and it's pretty far away from emergency resources. So those are some of those functions that change there. And it's just heavier burning stuff. You guys are getting closer up into the timber as well, so it's, yeah. The nice part is if y'all are living down in here, you're probably pretty good. Grass fires there.
Trish, you're good.
Yeah, but the rest of you guys, that's why we really work hard with, the defensible space. Woodland Hills does kind of a community cleanup chipper day, so that might be something worth kind of thinking about in the future, is sort of the green waste, vegetation management stuff, which is what they're kind of looking at once the grant expires to figure out how to continue that program. So it's just lots of ways to skin that one. But that's kind of what we're here for, is we actually focus specifically on wildfire preparedness planning. So that's our contribution to your city plans.
So Brianne, our current boundary covers this side of Loafer Canyon, and and then it starts to cover this side as we come up past this development here, and then it basically swings down this hillside drive, and then out around the golf course. It was adopted in 1996. And I guess the question as we look at this and looking at this darker area, this is the older part of town.
Yep.
It was built in the 1970s, 1980s, and so this has been here for a long time. And at the time that this boundary was put in place, that was really all that was developed in town. I mean, there are a few homes here and there on Loafer Canyon and some out along Goose Nest, but so you kind of see the boundary at the time was basically, here's the outside edge of the town.
Yeah.
And I guess the question that, as I look at this, my concern becomes, what makes the most sense here? Because this does seem to be a high-risk area up here in the older part of town, at least from the maps, what's showing there. And there are a lot of mature trees. If you look on an aerial photo of the older part of town, you see a pretty good canopy.
There's gullies with natural vegetation in it and all kinds of
Exactly.
things, right?
You know, and you can if you did want to designate the whole city as a WUI area, now that your development is potentially being pushed out here, I think it's really important to capture some of these fringe areas if you do have plans in the future to put additional communities up there, because that will just, and Dave's kind of the code guy, but that'll keep your codes, the building codes up to a higher standard.
And like I say, my recommendation would be, if it was my community, I would extend your thing all the way to the rest of your community that way and establish there. And then, like I say, if you've got a very active development review committee as things go, you're front loading it, and it's a lot easier to get the developers to do things when it's part of a development review than to come in afterwards and put it on the homeowners to catch it back up. So do it ahead of time, and knowing this area and fighting fires and stuff and knowing what's up there, even though this ain't as red, in reality you start adding things in there, it'll turn red in a hurry. My recommendation on your zone was I just punch it the rest of the way and then assess it as development goes in there. And again, you have the ability for the development review committee to make adjustments if somebody comes in and they're building a planned unit development. I don't know what your planning codes are if you even allow those kind of things, and it's all gonna be paved roads and green grasses and not fire resistant stuff and everything. You can use, the thing about the WUI code is it really is a sliding thing. It's not you think the codes are hard, fast, black and white, but the WUI code, what's tough about applying is that you can do trade-offs, so you can work it around with the ultimate goal of making it sustainable when a fire thing, because we don't have enough resources to ever put a fire truck on every driveway and that kind of stuff, especially when it's happening like now. By the time we get the federal resources, they're not guaranteed how soon we're gonna get them there. So anything you can do. So my recommendation, if it were my community and I was your fire marshal making recommendations, I'd recommend that you bump your buffer to the rest of the community, and knowing that you have your development review process to adjust as need be, because in reality, your whole community is a risk. I mean,
So we pretty much have everything that's not developed on the south side in that zone. That's all covered
in the current zone.
in the current zone.
The real question becomes
How far
again, how far do you carry
How far to
it
the north do we bring it
realistically?
realistically, right? Where we start doing these
So
kinds
if you're
of
talking about where we have most of the green area and
Yeah.
that kind
Correct.
of stuff. And I agree with Bree, is I probably would not designate that as a WUI area with what you already have there and what the kind of development you're doing in there.
So we're saying 3 and below, not a WUI area, but 4 and above, so as soon as we start hitting that yellow, is that
Well,
what you're
didn't you say
designating?
some of this already was in
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, correct, it is.
Yeah, so it's already.
It's really on the outside
Well,
of the town.
Yeah,
So
so
the bulk of that
our
red
real question here
isn't covered.
is this area here and this up in here, because these other areas on the outside are already covered in it.
Right.
And then, of course, you always have the thing of, that's your old side of town and it's already there. And one thing about the WUI code is not it's retroactive if they do a major
Right.
thing, so.
Okay.
So that would be as a.
We still have a fair
question.
amount of land that's, I mean, there's some areas that
Quite
aren't
a few.
developed yet.
There's-
You really look
You've
at
got
it.
the whole
There's gonna be
section
quite a bit
down,
of infill.
down in Loafer Canyon, really from where Welcome to Upgrade signage from that point north. There's
Well,
still a lot
plus you-
of scrub, oak,
And you have
grass.
Hillside over to the golf course, that whole development area. You've
Right.
got below Salem
And
Hills
now it-
Drive, you've got
and
that
that's-
big hill.
Center area there, is it already, is all the lots in development already approved? Or, I mean, the lots are approved under existing.
Well, they.
It's
so-
platted, but
it's-
the permits aren't drawn, all of them, correct?
Correct, that's. The original part of town, when it was platted, there were these open spaces, these strange spaces all around everything. And over the years, people have purchased those and added them into their lots and have created other spaces that will become potential lots. And I would say there's probably, well, we put together a list of different parcels that looked like they were possibly big enough to have a house on it, and how many were on that list? It was a fair-sized list, would you say 50, 60 lots, or?
Yeah, between 30 and 50.
30 and 50? Okay, and then we have, and I know there's a couple spots that weren't specifically listed on there, so we're probably looking at, you know, somewhere around that 50 potential homes in the, or new homes in the older area, in that part of the city. And then, yes, then the developments either to the north or the south, some more development in that Loafer Canyon.
I think the biggest factor that's come up, wasn't it, was requiring sprinkler systems in every house, you know, from the developers, you know, the state builders association,
Yeah,
you know, was in.
They're anti-sprinkler.
Yeah, they were saying,
So, and I actually have a couple questions about that. One, most of the houses on the south side there, and all that new area, they have sprinklers in there right now, because we've had, prior to this year, we've had that ordinance to require them to do sprinklers. So now as we basically say, we're not gonna require you to do sprinklers except in this wildlife, what was it,
Interface,
yeah, whatever it is.
WUI.
But my question is, how do sprinklers systems in the home really alter or modify the way you see a fire progress, or the way you fight the fire and the advantages of it?
Okay, what a residential sprinkler, see, a lot of times people don't realize there's really two threats to the community. We always think of the fire coming down the hill and coming into the town. But you also gotta think about the structure catching on fire and spreading to everybody else.
Mhm.
So structure can take out a community just as well as a fire up on the hill can take out the community. What the purpose of a residential sprinklers are designed on, a fire flow out of two sprinkler heads, quick response, basically keep it to the single room that the fire starts in.
Right.
And so residential sprinklers are really protecting the structure from spreading out of the area. And so that's how those work. And when in the legislature and the home builders got the thing going, and I'm on the Uniform Code Analysis Committee every 4 years, I got to deal with the, well, 3 years I should say, deal with the new codes coming out. And it's, every year they try to take a little bit more out of our code ability, because, I mean, we have legislatures that if they had their way, we'd eliminate codes altogether. Especially the gentleman from King County has to push every legislative session. So what they did is, they took away our ability to actually require sprinklers, but they left us the ability to use sprinklers as a tool in applying our code. So,
Mhm.
so we can use sprinklers in lieu of help, you know, some of the, up in Heber, for example, I spent a year going to meetings up there because developers didn't want to put sprinklers in there, and then ended up in, well, okay, put in you got an area, you're gonna put 10 homes, and go ahead and put it in a $10 million water system with hydrants I'm okay with that, sure, go for that. Well, it ended up being sprinkler because of water supply issues. So you use sprinklers as kind of a tool, but remember that sprinklers, that's what it's for, is to protect the home from taking out the.
So in our
rest of the
case, if
community.
we had a structure fire somewhere in the, below the, north of the old part of town, let's say, right? And it caught on fire and you had a north wind blowing, right, where it pushed it up towards the mountain. One of my biggest fears after living here for through these three fires that I've seen is once you get something started and you get a north breeze blowing up this canyon, the whole thing's just gonna light up. Woodland Hills is gonna light up. It's gonna be very difficult to contain,
You'll be seeing it.
right? So the sprinklers are really a preventative mechanism, right? To prevent just that kind of a scenario.
In some areas, Park City, for example, actually require eave sprinklers and stuff, and a lot of it has to do with the vegetation type and stuff. But if part of your thing is, you know, if somebody builds a home and gives a vegetation plan and follows our Breeze, she's our fuel person, I'm the one that has to deal with it after the fire. But the thing is sprinklers are a tool, and I'm obviously an advocate of sprinklers. I mean, and you can put sprinklers in. I've had homes that are single homes way out in the Thurrah, and the nice thing about a residential sprinkler is the way they're designed, quick response. A 500-gallon tank in a closet space could actually protect a home because you're taking the fire out of a single room.
Yeah, sure.
That's what the idea behind it is, to get the fire quick. It's like a fire department in the house.
But it
And
seems to me if that's the case, then not only that would, in my mind, want me to draw the boundary a little further into town so that those houses that are not actually in that really high risk area from a wildfire coming in, but you would want to protect those homes from spreading a fire going out, right? So if we drew that, I don't know if I explained that very good, but if you draw that boundary tighter, then those homes there before the real dense wooded areas, right, it would kind of create that buffer zone in case something did happen before it got into the older part of town where there's a lot of vegetation, there's still a lot of natural landscape in there, right? The people have usually a lot larger lots, right, and they've left a lot of it natural.
So just to.
So I probably really bad
kind of build on
explaining
that,
that.
and I'm gonna take the extreme here, but just in this discussion, but for instance, we have Elk Ridge Meadows Phase 1 and 2 that are on the far north end of town. They're located right here.
Yeah.
And these, they have an open space area that runs through them. So we've got just natural grasses and weeds that basically run right through there, using this same theory that say you have a house go up. Of course, the nice thing is both those are built out and there are sprinklers in there.
Mm-hmm.
But then we've got potential development to the side of Elk Ridge Meadows Phase 1. Part of that would be up against part of that open space that right now, since we've had to outlaw the sprinklers outside this boundary, they wouldn't have the sprinklers. So say you construct a home over there, it catches on fire, you have a large fire from it, and then winds are blowing, like you say, to the north, it catches that open space on fire, and it spreads quickly up through the grass, and then we're up to other homes there. I guess the question becomes, when you start to look at this, how much vegetation and what types of vegetation are a problem? What are the types of vegetation that you're going to see that fire really spread and jump? I mean, I know from what I've seen and understand from the fire that occurred up in the Uinta area there, that a lot of that sounds like was burning underneath, and just spread across the ground.
There's no doubt the biggest and fastest carrier of fire in any environment is a short grass type fuel model, that's what's bred. So what the biggest key is in your area with the center thing with grass, is there roads around it and the homes, and that's why when we teach people about defensible space, that's what we're doing is, okay, you get the wire in that center portion of grass, but if the people around there are maintaining their homes, they built the homes to, you know, to halfway to the WUI code thing, so they have enclosed decks and stuff. One of the things I always tell people when I do assessments is, when you have a windstorm, where does all the debris and dust collect? Because that's where the embers are gonna collect. So it gives you kind of an idea. So if the people maintain their property and do that kind of stuff, if you have that center section that is grasses, it's gonna burn quick, but hopefully it won't go anywhere if it's surrounded by streets, or if the yards against it are maintaining, you know, the defensible space around their homes, then that's where the fire's gonna go, and that's where we're gonna stop it. Or it's gonna, you know, or get their vinyl fences, they always burn well when they burn.
Very well.
And tar.
Just managing, you
Yeah,
know, those
that's
open
the thing.
spaces, whether it's mowing, grazing, you know, Saratoga, we work with them a bit, and Sitla kind of helps manage some of the risk out there by having rotational grazing to deal with some of their grass and open space problem. And Santaquin, out towards Summit Park, we know they keep their goats and they sometimes help manage stuff, and we were trying to use that to maintain one of their fire breaks. So that's the other key component, you know, if it's just not feasible to require some things, then maybe taking a look at better land management practices if you're dealing with the open space, whether it's public or private
Who
property.
actually owns the open space? Is it a homeowners group, or is it a lot owner?
The city now owns it.
Yeah, so, you know, what, and
So
and
would
that's
you know
something
that
that,
it
you
counts
know,
towards your participation commitment?
or if somebody's got some cows or sheep that wanna go out and graze it. But yeah, there's a,
We allow, on the south end of town, we allow grazing. They've got animal rights, they run cattle
Yep.
up there to help manage that.
so that's some ways to help manage some of your vegetation, at definitely lower costs for sure. Camp Williams does quite a bit of grazing using goats and sheep with some of their oak, and then they use the cattle to help with the cheatgrass. So that's sort of where we come in to help look at this, and there's actually grant programs out there to also look into, but that could be a possible trade-off too, you know, it's just, everything's kind of a give and take, and the vegetation is the big thing that we really encourage, because if there's not a whole, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to get rid of everything, but better planting, weed management, a lot of communities are looking towards beefing up their weed programs a little bit, because cheatgrass is one of those invasives that's a really,
Backyards,
really good
pretty,
fire carrier.
Yeah.
You know, so there's just, and that's part of developing the community wildfire preparedness plan, which is, you know, the requirement of the participation commitment, and that's where we come in to help facilitate that, put you in the right direction for
Right.
funds potentially, and help you line out specifically how to achieve those goals, because it's just, a lot of things are up for negotiation, I think, for what the best practices are, because what's gonna work with your neighbors might not work for you guys.
Shay, where do we require more stringent building code due to this? I mean, because it doesn't follow this boundary, does it? In our,
So we have a section, and I sent that to Brianne, the code that we had there. We have a more stringent code inside the wildland urban interface.
Is that the boundary that we use for that
That's-
as well?
Yeah, and
It's
that's
not
the
a-
boundary that we use for it. But then the question when I sent over to her, my question was, is our code really, it's fairly small, it's fairly generic and in general, and I look at it even in comparison with Utah County's code. It seems like the major subjects are there, but there's certainly not very much information in there or very many requirements in our code, not a lot of detail in our code. Is our code sufficient or not, or do we need to, because then I look at the states, you know, what they've recommended, and you've got basically a book, and there's.
Very much to it, yes, the state law requires that you adopt that minimum, that little booklet that you talk about. Utah County has chosen to go more, you can go more restricted, just not less than that.
So I bet the odds are you probably meet the 2,000, and then the interesting thing is the 2,000 wildland urban in Utah is based on the 2003 international code, but it hasn't, and through this code process, we haven't been able to update it because, well, the legislature took the building code commission of adopting codes away, and that's a scary thought when it's the legislature that's approving codes, so we kept it alone because even the updates on the WUI code hasn't changed significantly enough to do the battle on the hill, I guess is the best way to describe it. Is if we leave it alone, they're leaving it alone, and we got something which is better than nothing. We encourage communities to really seriously look at it, and if you do like Utah County or you find some areas that you want to beef up, yes, go for it. But at least you have some minimum stuff in there, and that's really what and the way the state's looking at it is that's why with the cooperative agreement requiring the mitigation work is so we're looking at a lot of the keys to keeping catastrophic wildfire down. If we do the mitigation work, that's really where a lot of the difference is going to be, and so that's how that program came about. So what and I'm taking it that you guys did sign a cooperative agreement.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so then you'll have a participation commitment that you'll have to do every year that's based on the risk and that kind of stuff. So what the state's kind of gone to is where we're going to make the difference is getting the mitigation work done because that hasn't been being done. So the carrot out there is you do your participating commitment and stuff, and the theory behind that is we reduce the risk of catastrophic wildland fire. So in answer to your question on your code, I can look at it, but what I do to validate whether a community meets the state requirement is I just take the state code and your code and you meet what's there, and anything above that is great, but if you don't have anything, then it's not so great.
So we need to,
that's-
from what you're saying, we need to update our code to meet the state code, because ours is, like I say, all the main subject, even with state code, the main subjects are there, but the details are not in there. And so
yeah.
that may be the level. Let me ask you one other question, because you said earlier that you've kind of talked to developers about the fire sprinkler issue, and I'm sure talked to them about these higher standards for construction. In your discussions, realistically, how much do you think this adds to the price of a new home to meet this code?
What I've been told, depending on how much a square foot it is, but it's usually in a normal standard home, maybe 5,000. And because the thing about a residential sprinkler is you don't have to sprinkle attic spaces, different places. It's just the living spaces, and they've gone to the point now where they can install sprinklers where you have to really think about them really being in there. They're not. It's not like it's not like this. They're, you know, they're enclosed and stuff. So it really is. They've technology gotten to the point where it's not and is invasive as what people think. Where it comes into an issue is retrofitting. If it's built in with originally thing, the plumbers end up adding to it, and it doesn't really significantly add to the cost. But retrofitting a house is a whole different ballgame. Yeah, so after the fact, we run into people don't want to do it afterwards.
So you, from what you were saying, it sounds like areas that are unmaintained, that are weeds and grasses, or fields that are unmaintained, is a bigger concern than just being up on the mountain necessarily.
They
Or
both
they're
work together.
Yeah.
Because you know, as your open spaces catch,
Maybe.
that's when you're talking about your north wind that's pushing everything up canyon. So if those nice light fuels, you might get a thunderstorm here, and 20 minutes later, because it's July, it's already dried out and ready to go. So, and you know, when you can see even some of the other fires that we get up on the East Bench, closer to Salt Lake County, where there's all of that annual cereal rye that's growing in there, intermixed with cheatgrass, that burns a lot hotter than you would think, which then preheats all of the oak. and makes that more susceptible to burn. So that's why, you know, they all kind of work together to step into each of these other fuel models through here, and especially as it's intermixed, and, you know, if you've got some of these invasive grasses that every time you cause a disturbance potentially contributes to the spread of them if you haven't sprayed or done any mitigation tactics as you're creating a soil disturbance. So it's definitely a key component to manage a lot of that and to keep it from spreading and to keep it in check. It moves quickly, and that's, you know, much more affected by the wind. So keeping the grasses down would be a thing for sure. But then as you start getting out, working along here to manage a lot of the oak and some of the other vegetation, working with the neighboring landowners, you know, whether it be the forest or the state, because, you know, that's the other part. The feds don't really have a lot of money either to manage fuel stuff. Most of everybody's money gets sucked up into the suppression budget, so you don't always see as much as you would like to on the opposite side of the fence for other land managers. But a lot of that is if a community's not doing anything, then they don't really have much of an incentive either. They've got to go where their work is going to be matched just as well. So that's part of the other thing we work through with the wildfire preparedness planning process is pretty much our counterparts with the Forest Service and the county also get together to see what we can all contribute to this overall plan. So that's incorporating vegetation management as part of your codes, because that's, you know, in our WUI code and in yours, if you can really meet those vegetation standards, the minimum of 30 feet. Salt Lake with UFA and the Foothill Canyons Overlay Zone actually give up to 100 feet based on their risk with zones, so that way they can kind of get around the cut one tree down, plant two in its place.
They were gonna do modifications.
You know, so some people can have even higher standards, but the bare minimum is just wise planning and good home construction. If you do those two things, that's probably about the best you can really do. I mean, the data is pretty solid with, just even replacing some of your roofs. I mean, going from some of your older cabins from the cedar roofs just to an asphalt, cedar, fiber cement, something along those lines will increase your home's survivability almost 60%. And that's just the roof. Never mind the fact that, you know, if you can build into the building plans, maybe don't let them plant giant spruce, conifer trees that are full of oil right next door to the house. Because that's a common thread you'll see in some of those communities that burn in Colorado. They're great brand new homes.
And they've
They're
dried
very
out in the
nice
drought and the needles are brown.
and they're sitting in the gutters, and people don't realize that. So, and maybe kind of looking towards, and that's with some of our planting recommendations, is still plant stuff around the homes to give people privacy, offset the air conditioning bills, but just smarter planting is all. You can still have really nice, well-shaded neighborhoods. There's just better trees to plant for sure.
So it seems like with this boundary that we would want to include more of the city in the boundary, because there's a benefit there with sprinklers in the home to prevent the initiation and the spread of a fire from within the city to the wildland area. And then within that boundary, that WUI boundary, right, would be to look at individual circumstances and vegetation control ordinances, right, as you have more of a threat of the fire coming from the wildland into the city, so that you can be far more defensible with something that does start, right? So it seems like we've got both, in my mind, I'm working on both ends of this spectrum, right? Where we want to be preventative at the same, but we also need to be defensive. And the defensive actions, really, that's code in my mind. That's vegetation code, building code, right, in these areas, right? So I think that's
And that's requiring like the Woolly code too.
Yeah.
Right?
Right, that's all part of that code that would be enforced in that area, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I guess the one thing that, I mean, we've had people come in here who've made statements that, oh, it's so expensive to put the fire sprinkler system in the house, and people saying, oh, it's extremely expensive to build to this standard that is required. you know, on the backside of this boundary. And yet, I guess as I look at it, what I'm seeing is, for instance, the types of materials that people are putting on the outside of the homes up here. We're not in a community where we have starter homes, where we have lower income people that are using the vinyl sidings, the cheaper materials that are more flammable. We're seeing people coming in with the hardy boards, the cement boards. We're seeing people coming in, you know, bare minimum stucco, stone, and so they're already building the homes to a certain degree. They're already putting the money into the homes and building the homes to this standard, and so the big difference in cost, from what I can see, just looking at the standard. I mean, there is this enclosure of the decks, which we don't have people doing that. You know, and there's some extra venting that needs to occur, and the venting's a little bit different in eaves and that we don't have people doing. But that's not the venting part. Really isn't a cost issue. There's venting one way or another in there, and I'm looking at it going, really the difference is, and that's why these guys down here are fighting it. Home Builders Association comes in and fights it. It's the sprinkling system.
Yeah, it seems to be that too, sprinkler system, because I agree with you.
And so I guess as we're looking at this, I was hoping to be able to point that out and looking at this, because personally I feel like I'm kind of on the same track that you are, that covering more of the city with this boundary is better than trying to find the bare minimum that, you know, we.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that, not this, besides it's more of the change in mindset with vegetation right next to your home, the pine trees that they plant, you know, these kinds of materials that they put right. I know I did. My house, first thing I did is put a bunch of trees right around, and I got pine tree that's, you know, probably within 10 feet of my house. So, you know, I don't know.
So it's always a trade-off, you know, with what's actually gonna be feasible. So if sprinklers just aren't a thing that's gonna happen, then just really look very seriously about real defensible space, not just a couple branches for landscaping, but building that in is maybe a trade-off, is
And water
something
supply
to
stuff. Now,
discuss.
do you have developers, do they have to have the hydrant system in before they go vertical?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so, and like I say, there's just so much you can do with the development reviews cycle, and like I say, it's doing the trade-offs and what you guys are comfortable with, but I still recommend to do the rest of your community and then leave it to developers to sell you on. I mean, you guys sound like you are really interested in protecting your community. It's fuel modification, it's not a Cat D9 circling every house with 60 feet of bare mineral soil around every house. You know, like mulch, we don't put mulch around our house, it's just fuel modification. And when they do vegetation plans, I know with existing homes, Ree and I've gone many times, there's that family tree that they put up. Well, okay, if we're gonna keep that one tree against a house, there's things we can do around it, maybe a little, go farther out around that corner where that tree is, and, you know, and work on make sure you have a good solid roof, and remind people that think of their roofs like we do with mow our lawn, to make sure those pine needles don't stay up there and get plugged in because even a non-combustible roof with pine needles, if those things get on fire and stay there for any length of time, it'll penetrate that. They're not fireproof. They're non-combustible. So I mean, there's things that we can do. It's just such a process.
Well,
So fuel modification and
I just want to make sure Seth has an opportunity to ask any questions that he has. He's our fire chief, so.
Let me just say, if you want to blame me for the interface ordinance, go ahead, because I wrote it. It's okay, but I took all these things into consideration. And what was brought to me back when I put this all together, when I first became a fire chief here in the city, was the fact that I was approached on this upper area up in High Sierra Drive, Cove Drive up in there. People, they want to know, and the city was very concerned about building up on that hill. And the threat of wildland coming down out of the Fort Bay area into the city was the major threat at that particular time. And so I went through and I looked at what the state had done at that time, and I looked at what had happened. I looked at historical data from California, from all the fires that they've had on the foothills in California. And I put into that initial draw up and draft of that ordinance, vegetation. If you look at that, we cover vegetation. People wanted to keep natural vegetation around their home. So I put that in there. I called it islands, where small and large islands, there's natural vegetation that can be in them. I recommended sprinkler systems on all that. We covered the building construction of the home, the exterior masonry. The roofs would not be shake shingle, but had to be asphalt. I even cover spark arresters on the chimneys for those that want to have a fireplace. So in case something comes out, it can actually be stopped at the fireplace from something spreading outside the home from a controlled fire inside. So we looked at all that. We went through the defensible space. We've addressed the 30-foot issue around the home. We realized also that even though it's 30 feet, some of our setbacks are only on one side, could only be 12. So you can't really encroach on your neighbor's property. You have to work together to make that defensible space between the two owners to get all that done. And so we've addressed that, but again, that was back in 1996. And so I do absolutely recommend, just like our forestry friends here are saying, that we need to update our code. Let's make it match what's there. I don't have any questions because we've been talking about all the stuff that we've already kind of addressed in our code. We just need to get it up to speed with where we're currently at. I'm in agreement, Mayor, about making that a little bit bigger, that interface area a little bit bigger, and like you say, shrinking the boundaries in there. I think that you need to really be concerned
Shrinking,
about
you mean less area in the.
more interface area.
Right.
Let's talk about
Yeah,
more
yeah,
interface
so I want to make sure
area.
we clear on what
Yes,
shrinking means.
We're saying the same thing two different
Yeah.
ways, but yes. But incorporating that in. I think the other thing that we need to consider is, like we're talking about the grass areas coming up from the north part of the city. There's a lot of those that are open between buildings. And like we were talking about ember travel, jumping the Columbia River. I've seen embers go for miles. We've watched videos in fire training about embers jumping freeways, all kinds of things. It happens all the time. And I think for us to not consider the north part of our city that we could not have that happen, we're kidding ourselves. Because we saw the fire earlier in May. We burned an entire backyard off in about 5 minutes, just with cheatgrass. Tore out a fence, everything. It was a mess. Luckily, we're there. We got it caught before it got any further than that. But we could definitely have some ember spread from that. And if that got into any of these areas, this area right out here, just west of the city building here, if a fire started down on the north end of town, it could travel right through there all the way up with a north wind in just a matter of minutes. And so for us to think that that is something maybe we could let be, I don't agree. I think we should look at those areas because we have a north wind regularly. And when we have that wind direction coming from the south just as often, and it could go either way. I mean, when we had the fire in Loafer Canyon in 2012 with our arsonist, when we had 6 fires in that short amount of time in 3 weeks, I was very nervous and extremely. I listened to the pager, taking my radio to work, all that kind of stuff, just in case something happened, because it could have spread north or south in just a matter of seconds. And if we don't address it, if we don't do anything, we're just going to leave ourselves open for something bad to happen, and I don't want that to happen.
Right, okay.
Tooele had 10 homes taken out just by a 1 acre grass field in the middle of town. It took out 10 homes, and they started the homes on fire in less than a minute. Which, listening to the chief, it sounds like I'd still go with my original recommendation, make the whole community wildland urban interface community.
Then prove to me why you don't think you have to put something in. I mean, the other part of this, I know we're talking urban interface, I got that. But we also, within this, really need to consider our ability to respond as a fire department. I mean, we're there. We're doing our best to cover 24/7. It's about people. It's about having the bodies to man a truck. It's about being able to go out there and knock that fire down in a quick hurry. I mean, I sweat bullets from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That 7-8 period of time right in there, I am nervous every day when I go there because of that. And I just never know if something's going to happen. Luckily, I'm only worried about it extremely between Monday and Thursday, because I have a crew in town on Friday. The weekends are always covered, and every night after 3, I've got a crew that starts to come back. And so we can man trucks and do a lot of different things, plus our mutual aid and automatic aid agreements are in place to help with that. But as soon as we could stop a fire from getting anywhere, we're gonna be much better off. People complain about sprinklers, they complain about the cost. You know, Nelson, you could probably tell us about the insurance piece. To keep a fire contained to room and contents, yeah, you're gonna have some water damage, but you're not gonna lose your whole house. And we've seen that happen. We've seen entire houses basically go up because there wasn't a sprinkler system. If there was, it wouldn't have been as bad. Brittany?
I was just gonna say, Seth, I appreciate you like putting this code back in 96, and I agree with you and the mayor about having the majority of the city in this code. And although it does add some cost to the houses, some building, right? That preventative vegetation requirement up front, that $5,000 sprinkling system in the home when it is built, is gonna protect everybody in the
Around
city.
it, yeah.
And what I don't wanna see happen is, if it's optional, one neighbor puts it in, another neighbor's, we're not gonna add that cost to our home, it adds a few $1,000s, so we choose not to, right? And then, because of personal choices, it puts the whole community at risk.
Sure.
And so I think it's our job as a council to protect the whole community. And I don't know, that's just personally how I feel.
The other part of that, and I appreciate you bringing that piece up, the other part of that is if a contractor has already set that price into the bill, and then they decide that they're not gonna put that in, are they gonna refund that back to the homeowner or not? Right now, it's been not.
Secondary water.
So we have some secondary issues with this already going on, with whether you're gonna choose to do it or whether you're not gonna choose to do it. And so I completely agree with what you're saying.
Let me ask, I haven't heard anything from Nelson or Dale or anybody, but do you have any questions you'd like to direct to our folks from the Forest Service? Because I want to make sure that they know that when they're tired of listening to us, they can leave, okay? Because at some point in time, this is gonna come down to a council discussion, right?
Yeah,
That we're gonna have to set this, right? But
No.
I think we got a fair recommendation from them and understanding of what all this means, but certainly if you have questions, will you please make it known, and then they are willing, that they can feel unobligated to stay here any
My
longer.
one question would be right now, with the interface ordinance that we've got in place right now, are we still okay to enforce that? And including with the sprinklers that we've already got in place, which is a supplemental to that as well? Because that's been the big issue right now, is sprinklers in
From the
homes.
sprinklers, the
Because we've
only,
already got the interface ordinance in place. The
So-
sprinklers was a secondary issue,
we have the boundary, it was the 96 boundary,
correct?
right?
And
our
I thought it
ordinance
was
for
a little different than what
sprinklers,
Shay explained, but that's neither here nor there, but okay.
and the sprinkler portion of that is that we require sprinklers if you're in that interface zone.
We'd have to go back and look at the ordinance that was put in place in 2006.
We
because
just
that's
put
the
a new
sprinkler
one,
pl-
we
okay.
put a new one in, we
Okay,
removed
okay.
that one, because
Okay.
that was no longer lawful because of the state's new,
Yeah,
The change.
they changed the,
Okay.
so now you can't just arbitrarily require sprinklers,
Right.
but you can require sprinklers if you add them into water supply issues, or there's a formula and it's in the code about,
Okay,
you can still have residential sprinklers, but you have to meet, you can't just arbitrarily say you have to sprinkle.
right, I understand, but I guess I'm just going on information that's been
Yeah.
happening.
so we've altered our code to match
Okay.
state code.
Got it,
Yeah.
I'm good.
And it allows it if you are it requires it actually, if you are in the urban interface area.
Mhm.
So then our issue became, well, what part of our city is in the urban interface area?
Got it.
And this is where we brought in the Forest Service to work with them.
No, you're
To
DNR,
make sure.
right?
Yeah,
We're
we're
DNR.
state
Sorry,
forestry.
don't make it so
Sorry, state forestry.
Sorry.
For some reason I feel better about that. I don't know why.
Sometimes it's us and them, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So effectively, what we need to do is address the boundary line and maybe change it from where it was in 19.
To incorporate a bigger part of the city, understand?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I understand it, based on what's being presented. I understand the fuel loading and all the fire issues, and I've been through the training, so I understand that. So I don't have a whole lot of questions. The only question I have is how soon are we gonna address what the boundary is?
Well,
Let's take some action on it.
we're supposed to address the boundary next in the work session, so, but I don't, but there's gonna be a lot of discussion that goes on, but they may not be interested in, right?
So my only thought is, that I would be interested is maybe getting together with you guys another time, so we can kind of learn, or our planning, and maybe with planning commission too, and the people that sit in and on TRCs and stuff. I mean, what the codes are that we can require, what kind of some give and take are depending on the situations, right? You're talking about, you know, because I want the developers to understand, I want the homeowners to understand, I want the city personnel, council who are working on these issues to understand. Because, I mean, all we hear is cost, 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 right? And we try to say, well, I mean, so we can appropriately say, well, if you do X, then we can do Y. You know what I mean? But where we don't have that knowledge, I don't know. I think I would just be more interested in kind of.
Well, that's why I say it becomes, once we set this zone, this boundary.
Yeah.
It becomes, let's now look at the code make sure that's up to date and that we address it, right? And there may be different areas where we can do different things to meet the necessary defensible kinds of
Right.
activities, right?
Right, and so then we can inform our residents,
Right.
what kind of actions can they take to mitigate their risk damage around their house and the vegetation and what, I mean, everything that you do every day, kind of inform all our residents, because I think we need to get that information out to them, so they can each take steps around their own homes, because we can put it in the code and require new buildings to do it, but what about everything that's already here? And I think we just need to get the information out.
And that goes back to
That-
this
that was-
plan that we get to put in place, this mitigation piece.
It
we're
does,
talking
it's
about.
all included in there.
We need to address that so that we can.
Right, and-
That was
reduce
part of the
that.
original interface piece, was giving people guidelines of what could be acceptable.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is guidelines to maintain and give you some checklist things that would help to do that.
The hard thing is gonna be convince people like me to change my yard.
It's only mine, it's only mine.
I mean, let's be honest, right? It's an established yard, I got nice trees.
But here-
But there's
here
other
it
things
is.
we can do besides changing yards, right?
it's-
Like
if
cleaning
it's
up gutters,
sprinkled,
like,
Of course.
Sprinkled, cut your weeds, if you've got some natural vegetation, scrub oak, let's call it what for what it is.
Right.
Cut the dead out.
Yeah, that makes a big difference.
but I mean, if
It
we
does.
even with the
Reduce the fuel
seasons,
load.
if we could put in like the newsletter, a monthly maintenance, fire maintenance, right, in the monthly newsletter. of
Monthly
kind of-
fire tip.
I'm
Right?
happy to do it, it's no problem.
I mean,
We're doing
just-
some of that anyway.
Because then it doesn't seem like overwhelming to a homeowner too. Okay, this is the one thing I need to do this month around my home or yard.
Sure.
And
I mean-
you hit the key right on, and I know when I go and educate people on the existing homes, it can be so over daunting, so we look at, when we do home assessments, and I'm sure your fire department will do home assessments, absolutely.
Call us.
And then prioritize, what's the biggest threat to that particular thing, and work on it. I live in the city, I'd much rather live up here in the mountains, but I live in Ogden, so that explains. But I have to mow my lawn every week. People in this type of area just have to do fuel management every week and do, and like I say, just work it, don't do it all one Saturday afternoon, because it'll just,
It's overwhelming.
Well,
yeah.
my problem is with my neighbor behind me. I'm doing everything I can for my property, but that person
Yeah,
behind me,
giant
it's
field.
vacant lots. The weeds are 6, 7, 8 feet high. And the city hasn't done anything for 2 years.
Well, you should fix that.
What, throw a match to it?
I can burn it all off in June if you like. We're in the open burn time. I'll
One
burn it all off.
scenario is for some
Yeah, actually, we gotta do this, probably not the
Do you have
best.
any questions? Do you have-
to address just
We
that
don't-
issues.
it's been one of the first
Especially if it's a
things to
private
do on this job.
community, they'll have in their CCNRs written that, you know, if the weeds get over X number of inches.
Yeah, we
you
have
need to
that.
waive
We
it.
have some-
You have to enforce, because, you know, they
We don't
actually
have anybody
enforce
to enforce
theirs. And granted, that's
Ours
within our,
is
but that's
actually
within
very
an HOA though. So it might be a little challenging if it's just the city as a whole, but we have seen in other areas, people addressing just that of, well, our neighbors aren't doing anything about it, but it's somewhere up by the Capitol, one of those neighborhoods, their CCNRs enforce it, and if you violate it, you'll be getting a bill in the mail
Yeah.
from the
Well,
HOA
The
basically.
guy that owns all the lots behind me lives in Provo somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, that's an enforcement issue, which we're working on.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment to that? Talking to some of the guys in Woodland Hills in their development of their community wildfire prevention plan, in the process of developing that, they got a citizens committee together to develop it. And they got pretty good buy-in from the community as a whole. With the grant money came, there was a lot more buy-in from the community because the citizens didn't have to pay for all of the work. And really all they had to contribute was sweat equity, as I understand. So in the development of the CWPP for us, there's an opportunity to get a lot more citizen buy-in to do a lot of this work without having to use a heavy hand or a big hammer on them if they're not contributing.
So I was gonna ask you two more questions I think the council would be interested in. And the first one is with this process, of course, from the city's perspective, we're amending an ordinance, and by amending that ordinance, then that boundary is in place. But this boundary also needs to go through you guys for approval. So my first question is, what is that process? I mean, we've met with you here, and then they'll make a decision on this. Is there a formal process we need to go through, or what?
When you make the ordinance and actually redesignate your area, all you need to do is send our office the amendment thing, and if it doesn't strike us, if you left out Loafer Canyon or something that was a definite wildland urban interface, drew a line around it, we might say something, but that's all the formal process, because according to state law, it just has to be approved by our division.
Okay.
Basically,
And
You guys like donuts?
if your fire chief approves it, we're gonna approve it,
Yeah.
is the bottom line. So as long as your fire department thinks that it's appropriate.
And I work for the mayor's
You
city
know.
council, so, if y'all want it, I like donuts.
There we go.
Because that's, I
We
work,
really are down to setting the boundary.
yeah,
That's where we are,
But,
right?
yeah,
I shouldn't say it that simple, because we will look at the code and make sure that
Yeah,
it meets the requirements that we are expected to meet, at least, at a minimum. Maybe additional things from our needs, right, that we want to do. But really, we're right now this is where we're gonna draw the boundary, and I think that Shay's question is, once we do that, what do we do to get it approved by you?
all we really
you know?
need is,
a copy.
well, actually, just your geospatial data, or you can just take a Sharpie and draw it on here, and I will digitize it myself. But, and it's just some of the different committees we posted on, our interagency schools committee that submits this data to the federal register for communities at risk. I mean, there's one of the community risk assessment sections, even in the fire plans that we're gonna be developing, is all based on what the input is from your local fire department.
Oh,
So
great.
by and large, they're the local experts. We just like to try to weigh in as best we can from the bigger state picture, but you have a really good fire department who is pretty
We
forward
have
thinking,
an awesome
so
fire
I
department.
think that by and large, you just send us a better map. And actually, we don't really have any maps, so to speak, because we haven't gotten super involved with the CWPP process yet. So pretty much anything you can submit for your WUI is better than what we have, which is nothing right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean,
Okay,
that's,
good.
that's where our
And you had a
role-
second question.
And then the second question is, you talked about you're working with Woodland Hills. What sort of programs and grants are out there that the city can take advantage of to be able to implement the vegetation clearance or other
So-
requirements of this?
There's a few different options available. FEMA, they has a pre-hazard mitigation grant. That's a hard one, very hard one to weed through.
Especially now, probably, because I think they're broke.
Yeah, exactly. And
They're
boy,
kinda
is that
tied
a
up right now.
challenging application. The one that Woodland Hills got was a state fire assistance grant, and that's given to us through the Forest Service, and that's just for state and private forestry. The life of the grant is approximately 5 years, and so those grants require a 50-50 match. So Spencer hit it with the sweat equity. If you want to come to me and say, Bree, we need $20,000 for chipper day, then I'm gonna say, I need $20,000 worth of work out of you guys, and then, yep, send me a bill. So that's one program, and with all of these, the disclaimers, they are insanely competitive to get a community-specific grant. But if you guys are just looking at a chipper day sort of thing, And by chipper day, we mean usually the residents, just like they do up in Woodland Hills, once or twice a year, will go out and remove a bunch of dead and live trees from their properties, stack it out on a street corner, and either the fire department, our local, Utah County pitches in, or a local tree service will come in and dispose of it, and that will be on the grant's dime. And actually, if you guys get a plan together this winter and slap it on my desk, you will be eligible for that funding next year. I mean, as soon as you get a plan that is just about done, and Dave and I can look at it and pass the red face test to our superiors, in some of these areas, or if the Loafer Canyon residents would maybe like to participate in that. It's just that same little bit of sweat equity, dollar for dollar in that regard, and those, we just kind of got a general pot of funds that we could help out, community 5,000 here, 10,000 here.
For me, the bigger picture is not necessarily the money,
Yep.
but is if we have a wildland, y'all take over the aerial. That's bigger for me than the
Indeed.
$2,000 I'm gonna get on chipper day. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
But the tanker that we dropped in on the fire that happened in 2003.
Yeah,
What was that? 50,000 for that one drop. That would have bankrupted the city.
oh, yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'm
Just
more interested
one
in
drop
that.
will.
I mean, I'll rent the chipper myself, I don't care. We can have people bring their stuff to the park, we can mulch it all, and they can take it home, put it in their flower beds. Okay, cool, no mess, but that's mitigating the problem. We're taking the dead out, using it for something else, put it back in flower beds, mulch, whatever, and it works. But if you have something that gets away from you, the burden doesn't bankrupt the city.
Yeah,
And that's a huge thing for us.
no doubt, we have to be wise and make sure that we're playing in
Sure.
that.
And that's where the mitigation
We want to be a
works.
partner,
Right.
we have to be a partner.
Because the fire costs, for your participation commitment, you get to, it's a 10-year average, you get to throw out the high and the low. The incentive for you guys doing the mitigation is, one year you get that $300,000 fire, well, we'll throw that one out because that was the high. You get another $300,000 fire, you get to keep that in your mix, and it raises your overall cost. So that's the big thing, is just to, we dangle some of these smaller programs to get you guys to do a little bit more of the mitigation work to kind of offset, the fuels there. And it's just a lot of the education we pitch in, we're in a lot of the communities, and we're there, we've got lots of brochures to give out. We do, anytime you ask us, we coordinate with the local departments, and sometimes we get the university to come up with their simulator, and to really try to change people's mindset a little bit, is put your dead trees, cut down a few live ones, because I hate to say it, but a few of those live trees have to go.
Yeah.
Sometimes your ladder fuels, that's awesome, but we gotta look at it big picture, and it's just a matter of, everything is up for negotiation. That's really the big thing, is always up for negotiation. We need to figure out what's best for each neighborhood, so. We're here though, and we're also here to
Great.
build for some stuff, so use us.
Good to come.
Okay.
Well, we certainly appreciate all
Appreciate
your
it,
help, and we take this seriously.
Yes.
I think we live in one of the most beautiful places there is along the Wasatch Front with this Mount Loafer
You sure do.
area right here. That's one of the very few places that faces north, right? So we have a higher density of pine trees, and it's prettier, but it's more dangerous because you got a heavier fuel load, right? And so not only do I want to protect that and protect the residents, it's both sides of the coin need to be taken care of here.
It's an ongoing battle,
Yeah.
little by little.
Let's take it seriously, so.
Your neighbors over here will be really happy when you start working too, because that's your shared boundary. So getting those Loafer Canyon folks to play along, that'll be great for both communities.
All right. Well, you're welcome to stay for as long as you'd like to stay.
Thank
I
you
mean,
for having us.
you can kind of tell we're gonna have a discussion on boundaries here probably after our council meeting.
This
What's
winter.
that? Yeah, let's take a couple minute break and then we get into our regular session.
Nice to meet you in person. They don't, so we'll be starting from scratch. Yeah. It'll be good now. It's not the new template.
Who's our scout over there that came to visit us? If you want, we're gonna, what's your name? Drew. Great. Well, you're welcome here.
So
In fact, I'd like to stay another couple minutes and do the pledge for us.
Sure.
Just read it, it's a simple process.
Yep.
Will you do that? We'd love to have you do that.
Yeah.
Drew
Anderson.
Anderson. Okay, great.
So the reason I'm here,
Uh-huh.
I'm actually working on communication or action.
Perfect.
Hi, this is Dale.
I didn't notice, I'm almost 18,
Uh-huh.
and I'm
Hey,
just
Joe.
nervous to write my email. So I'm kind of pushing.
Yeah.
I turned 18 in December, so
Okay.
that's why I'm here.
Sure.
But make it
Yeah.
notes on it.
We can do a picture right now if you want, and then after you do the pledge, you can leave if you need to, or whatever you want to do.
I don't
You'll be
know
on
if we're
video,
gonna
too.
talk
I don't know how,
about
yeah,
it.
you're already on video, you can
Council
watch,
meeting's
it's on
gonna last
YouTube.
Yep.
So, for sure.
Yeah, if you want to do it now or later.
So you think you'll give?
Let's do it right now. Come back here.
Usually.
Nelson, you take it? You got it?
It's gonna be a fast meeting, I
Yeah,
think.
because it's just approving
Right?
minutes.
It'll be a pretty fast meeting.
If it's gonna be quick, I'll stay.
Right, Mayor?
What's that?
Yeah, quick
Yeah, that'd
council
be
meetings,
fine.
so we go back into our work session.
Yes, we're gonna do that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. That's
We'll
how
be
it
in that
goes.
picture.
All right, you should have told me to wear my mayor shirt.
Thank you.
Volunteer.
We have to leave at 8:30 or something.
Okay, well, we're gonna try to get through this next piece as quickly as we can.
So, we got a question. See his property line.
Yeah?
There was a hole that's like 10 feet deep.
Yes, yes.
Has that been filled in?
I don't know if it's been filled or not.
Sure, a lot of kids like work.
I know it is.
And it's like, I'm just waiting for somebody to.
I know it is, and I told Royce, I'm not sure what we do on private property. But I told him to call him and tell him that our recommendation is for him to have it filled in. Because he's liable for anything that happens on his property. And that's gonna be a huge thing. It's not city property, otherwise I would up on Fred Turner's property, he dug that big hole, test hole. So we couldn't, I don't know how we could actually force him to close it in, because it's private property.
Well, if it's just a test hole, we could.
But
Yeah.
I think once this is approved, he'll have all that instructions. He was gonna have it up there 2 weeks. Because he didn't turn his paperwork. He had heavy equipment coming.
I hadn't even thought about it. They was right there was like,
Yeah,
I have
so
to
we've
let
already
kids
done
on
that.
mini bikes up there right around.
We told him, he said, if anything happens, it's gonna be your, you know. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, let's go ahead and begin with opening prayer. Trish Thomas will do that for us. And then we'll have a pledge of allegiance by Drew Anderson.
Okay, Drew.
Heavenly Father, we're so grateful that we can gather here together as a community and be able to help make decisions that will better the place that we live in. We are grateful for the beauty that surrounds us and for the happiness that it brings to us. Please bless that we will be guided and directed tonight, that we will make wise decisions that will help better where we live and to help our community. And we say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Will you please repeat the Pledge of Allegiance after me?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we need a motion, please, to approve, to change the time frame and approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion that we adjust the regular council meeting start time to 7:24 PM and follow the agenda adopted.
Second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Great, thanks. Let's do a roll call. Start with Dale.
Dale Bigler.
Brittany Thompson.
Nelson Abbott.
Ty Ellis.
Trisha Thomas.
Paul Crook.
All right. Have a few minutes for public forum. Do we have anybody that signed up to speak on
We
public
have
forum
one.
tonight?
Beth Wilson.
All right, Beth, you're up.
Hi. Please forgive any ignorance on my part. We're new to the city as of April, and this is my very first time ever coming to any city council meeting.
Welcome.
Welcome.
I had some communication with Nelson regarding the bookmobile service. Very concerned about it. From the information that I have, it sounds like it was an unexpected change in how the bookmobile is servicing our area, how it's paid for. So I'm interested in knowing when decisions we made on maybe rejoining that service, possibly joining with other cities, having some reciprocity with the libraries, information, anything.
Okay, so
Great.
great. Appreciate your concern. So when we do public comment, just to make sure it's a statement. But if you want to hang around until after we get that, we could discuss this in a work session following this, but we won't discuss it during the actual meeting. So you're welcome to stick around with it, but I appreciate the input. Anyway, so anybody else? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move on to our first agenda item, the Shedhorn Development Preliminary and Final Plat decision. Now, are we gonna have Brad on? Is he on the telephone?
If we need him.
Oh, if we need him. Okay. All right, Shay, take us through it.
We have a few things in
Yeah, let's just turn this, lay this down, so.
Unfortunately. That's because they don't know what we
I
are.
think it's really sensitive to sounds when I start to say.
Well, you can take one and make 3 minutes or so.
I'm gonna drink that beer soon.
All right.
So this was presented to you in the work session, the first council meeting in August. This is up on,
Royce, will you kill the big lights for us? I think you have, yeah, thank you.
so this is up on the south end of Canyon View Drive, and basically we have an existing home, and there were 3 parcels that are a good part of this, that what they're hoping to be able to do is to merge those 3 parcels and come out of it with one other parcel that they can sell off or construct, so another home can be constructed on it. And as we discuss this, they're being required to add pavement along Canyon View Drive as part of the future trail system that's shown in our Trails Master Plan. And then probably the other big issue that we discussed was the concerns about drainage. So I have sent back plans, and what I'm actually showing you here is one of those plans that I have sent back to them, asking them to make changes. Each time we get these plans back, some changes are made, others are not. The last set that came back is finally, this has been going on for several months, all summer long. The last set is finally fairly complete. Complete enough that I'm willing to recommend.
Okay, I was gonna say fairly complete concerns me.
This is what I'm saying. It's complete enough that I'm willing to recommend that we approve it. But there is one thing I would like to, if you do choose to approve it, that I would like to have added into the motion. Well, there's 2 items tied with this. They're showing the trail as being, the cross slope of it basically being flat. So basically all it's doing is running down the hill. So if water's coming off, it hits that, it's going straight down to the end, to the north.
So it's not getting into the side of the road.
And it's getting or you
It's
can,
gonna get pushed across the
you're
street.
just gonna
to
get,
the
you're gonna
next-
get a whole bunch
Yeah.
of water coming right down to the bottom, and there's no need for that. So the one thing it asks is that trail, is at the 2% cross slope that our roads have, so that water, as it moves down, it goes off to the side of the trail. And then the second piece of it is I was talking to the city engineer about this, and we think the solution on the side here, and possibly the solution further down as things, as the trail develops out in the future further down, is to require them to go in and basically put a depression off the side of the road. Basically what we're calling this is an infiltration trench. A French drain is really what it is. So basically about 18 inches wide, so the width of their bucket on their little mini X, and then a foot deep. And calculations on that, it really only needs to be.
And where would it run?
Really, just along the edge of the pavement. And it,
On-
and so
on
let
So
me-
we, so we
on the
have
side of the
road, trail, then we
yeah,
have
and
the
then you
French
want this
drain, and
basically-
then
yeah,
yard.
and then the yard, correct.
Okay.
And so this is the concept. So yeah, you have the road and the trail. And typically a French drain, you put in some sort of pipe with some rock, and you try to carry the water out.
Right.
The idea with this is we're trying to infiltrate. So the road comes down on a slope.
Yeah.
And so basically what we'd have them do is they would basically step the bottom of
I
this.
see. Oh.
And so as water comes down in here, sure, some of it's gonna run down,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
fine,
Yeah.
but it's going to go very slowly, and so we're gonna see percolation
Right,
through here.
right. Well, and then what, just fill it with gravel?
And so, yeah, so that's
So
just filled with gravel
Just
along this side.
and swells type of thing, right?
Exactly, and that's part of the reason that we want
It'd be
to.
nice if
we
those
want
were
to-
actually back sloped a little bit, but
And
anyway, keep going,
you
sorry.
probably could, but one of the reasons we want to try this is, and this is an ideal spot to do it because we are up at the top end, so we're not dealing with a lot of water up here.
Mhm.
And so we can test it and see, does this work or not? But what we find is you require swells, and then people landscape, and you may be able to enforce with the first set of people that are there in the landscaping that, hey, that swell needs to be retained. But years down the road, everybody forgets about it. They start planting shrubs in it or bushes in it. They go in and they level it out so that they can plant whatever they want. And nobody's coming back saying, no, you can't do that, or you're not supposed to be doing that, because everybody's moved on to other things. It's not the forefront of everybody's mind. And so the thought is, this is narrow, right at the edge of the road. It's from the top, it's no different than the shoulder. Looks no different than shoulder off the edge of the road. And want to see if that's more likely for people to leave that alone and allow that to work. But even say somebody came in and they put dirt over the top of it, with it being a foot deep, and like I said, it really only needs to be 6 inches deep to actually carry all the water from half the road if, in a theoretical world, if it were all to run off to the side.
Right.
So with it being a foot deep, even if somebody were to come in and put topsoil over there and put grass over the top of it, you still get the percolation benefits underneath. And so,
Have they done this in other places? I mean, has this been successful
Well,
in other places, or are we just unique enough that?
well, let's put it this way. The city engineer's looking at this as, yes, we've done this on a large scale.
Yeah.
We do this type of thing quite often on a large scale. On a small trench like this is kind of a hybrid between, like I say, but it's the idea of the French drain, that you can get the water down in there, but we don't want to move the water away. We want as much as possible to percolate.
Right.
And the one thing that is proven time and time again as we look at geotech reports up here is we have great percolation. Pretty much.
If you can find a percolation zone.
Well,
Mine's all clay, it's like.
well, there is. I mean, you've got you've got some, pretty thick layers of clay, but there's a lot better percolation up here than in a lot of places. There's a lot of places that you've got 20 feet of clay that you're having to deal with. Here you've got rock fairly close underneath. So, anyway, that's it. That's what we'd like to require them to do. We don't feel like that's very expensive. And again, this is somewhat of an experiment to see over time how this is maintained. But
Actually, we have the rock and stuff just up above your house and that, on the side in the gutter.
And it's full of silt, completely
It's
full.
all full of silt.
Full of silt.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
That's,
Kyle's had people come in and remove all the rock out, pressure wash it all out, clean up all the silt, put the rocks back, and then we get another rainstorm and it fills back up. Almost as-
that's what I was gonna ask, because there's 2 French drains up there and neither of them work after a very short time period.
Now, this one might be different because you don't have the dirty water coming off the side of the mountain.
well, I was going to say that's part of the problem. Is you're talking about large flows coming in, and then also the fact that a lot of that is coming off the mountain, and you are carrying a lot of silt with it. And the thought is in these neighborhoods where we're really just pulling the water off the road, we're not going to have that big of an issue with this. Certainly in some of those areas where you're carrying off the mountainside there, you need a lot larger. A small French drain isn't going to work. That's more of it needs to be.
So if we were ever to require curb and gutter, where would the curb and gutter go?
Right behind the pavement,
Just right where this trench is,
basically.
pretty much.
Now, we're having him pave up to the edge of the property line.
Okay, so it'd have to
In
come
this
back into
case.
the,
So we would probably cut back in.
come back in, right? So
You know-
eventually, if we ever got to that point where we did some kind of a special improvement district or whatever it would be, right? Then, so they got this under there and who cares, right? It's no real, there's nothing there that would impact them from planning or
Yeah.
doing anything like that, right? Curb and gutter would then take the whole stormwater problem away no matter what, so. There's no risk,
Correct.
it's no worse than just draining it off into the side.
Yeah,
Anyway,
in fact,
right?
it's more helpful.
It'd be more helpful. I don't know.
And I really think, and again, this is, there's a little bit of experimental
Yeah.
nature in this, but I
It is
really-
minimal cost and it is
I-
trying to mitigate the issue.
Yeah, I really think as
Let's
this
go
trail
and
is
dig in.
constructed down Canyon View, if we would continue to do this down the road, that ultimately as all this is connected, that it would work really well and you wouldn't have the large flows further down Canyon View
Correct.
that you're experiencing right now.
So, is there anything else before I say something?
So can I just clarify, so Shay,
Yeah.
this red is all your data and your input that you want them
Correct,
to.
and I believe the drawings that you have, he has dealt with what's shown in the red here on those drawings. If it's the same set that I was sent, he's taken care of everything that was shown on there.
Okay, because I have this one that shows all yours.
Is that what you were sent
That's
out?
what I was sent.
Okay. Well, he sent us a revised set of drawings,
Yeah, and that's,
and I did compare them to my, to
So it
these-
shows the
these
setback and all
markings.
that on the
Correct,
new set?
correct.
Yeah.
So there's no red on it?
No.
And
No,
he's
there's no red on it.
adding one lot or 2 lots?
So he's got one existing lot, he's
Yeah.
adding a second lot. There were 3 parcels there,
Yeah.
and
That
we-
didn't
we
meet
get to
code
it.
and then
Correct,
he's
yes.
making it meet code, taking those 3 parcels that were platted incorrectly and putting them
Yes.
into 2 lots.
and they
So,
do-
yeah.
they meet our current code,
Yeah.
both those lots
Up the
will.
corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get ones without taking ones?
I've got the same thing.
You've got the same things we do. Okay, that's what I got too.
So if there's one thing I've learned so far, I only think I've learned one thing, is that I really hate approving motions with promises. I don't know, except with amendment to it or whatever, right? I can't remember what it was, right? The slope of, you know, approve it with the assumption that they're gonna do that. We've done it before, right? But it's not on the drawing anywhere, and as long as we're confident that that's not gonna get overlooked, or, you know what I'm saying, right? I've learned that every time we do one of these, we always get in a situation where, oh, well, they didn't do it, right?
I mean, why don't we just wait till we have a correct drawing? 'Cause
That's what I'm asking, why don't we just wait? I know he wants to get done, and I don't wanna hold him up, and I don't know, and he was aware of I'm not talking about this part, this is fine. The stepping of that's a different issue, but the slope of the trail, to be consistent with the 2% grade off that road, is that not something they would be aware of, or is that something that is not a normal thing, or what? How's that?
You can do it either way.
Tell me.
If a lot of people like to have the trail on flat cross slope, and so
Okay.
that's what his engineers assumed.
Okay.
Because you know, you'll notice if you're especially if you're a runner, and I watch runners, and
You're a
you
runner.
can see what happens when they're running on the road. Sometimes they'll shift their position on the road depending on what that cross slope is. If it's a steeper cross slope, they'll move across the road to get to a spot that's flatter, because you can really feel that difference, you know. And so you know, I think the engineer made that assumption that okay, this typical trail will just make it flat here, and so I'm not, you know, I don't know that. And quite honestly, it was after I saw his drawing, when he added that detail in, and I looked at it and went, well, wait a second, how's this going to work with the drainage? In most cases, if we weren't on Canyon View, in most places, I'd be perfectly fine with that flat cross slope. But just knowing the storm drainage issues we have here, I would just like to have them, you know, have it match the road, and so we're moving the water off as
Okay, is there anything,
as we
those are the only two issues?
Those are the only two issues.
Okay, I would
Everything else
entertain a
is in that.
motion to approve this final and preliminary, with or without these changes from the council. So if anybody wants to make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we grant preliminary and final approval on the Shedhorn development with the adjustment to the trail to have the 2% slope, as well as the additional French drain infiltration system included
along Canyon View.
Sounds like a motion that's complete. Is there a second on that?
I'll second it.
Is there any further discussion before we take a vote?
I just want to say the reason I made the motion is I'm concerned that if we hold this up, that somebody's going to get hurt in the hole that's on that property. And I don't want to personally be responsible for it, so I'm taking the action now to do what I can to.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna let Royce speak to this one. Whoa.
With regards to the animals?
No, yeah, this is in regards to the animal code.
Any motion? Short version, we have tried, we've had a couple meetings here as administrative, trying to implement the code through the motion. And even within the office, we have had discussions on what does this equal. So in kind of the motion, we want to backtrack a little bit to create some clarification, so as we're trying to implement the code, it's a lot clearer for staff to be able to express to the residents what the code equals. That all makes sense. And so we'd like to redo the motion, retract the motion, and then redo it, stating if there's paragraphs to be inserted, that we'd say what the paragraphs are, what to, I think the indoor pets.
Yeah, which the indoor pets was an issue within it, because there was a lot of discussion about it, and then all of a sudden it was just gone. And the simple phrases of the motion that were made it hard to say, well, is this what was really meant? I mean, just whatever that piece of paper that I sent you the basis.
And this is after significant review of the minutes, right, on tape.
Significant review.
Remember, we made the motion and then we had this addendum and this change, and pretty soon it's like,
Yeah.
right? Well, they're confused and it's hard.
So we played some role play scenarios, and we sometimes couldn't come up with an answer. What does that equal? So if we could just retract and
Sorry,
try
we
to.
have thoroughly confused you.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Okay, so you halved all the numbers. Did you do 2.5 or was it just 2?
2.5?
2.5.
What do you mean? I
On
cut them.
these? You
Yeah,
cut
with the
them in half.
with the exception of pigeons.
Yep.
Because it just doesn't, if you're
That's
gonna.
okay, we don't need to revisit.
No, we don't need to, but yeah.
Just tell us
I
what-
went and pulled this.
Okay, so pigeon stayed 2.
No,
What?
stays 0.5.
This is what Laura's
Instead of
typed
half,
up
it
from
was-
Brittany's to.
Okay.
Yeah. So, as I
I'm
went
just
back.
trying to figure out what we,
Okay, so I went.
Okay, so let's go with this, let's take this in step. Change the paragraph under 1018A,
so the indoor pet thing,
right,
yes.
to say, every lot may have 2 pets, regardless of the lot size,
Mhm.
and they will apply toward the lot's total points.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
That's
That's
what
what
we
we had.
agreed.
Yeah,
But then we
that is what
took
was
out,
agreed
we
upon.
took out the indoor pets, we just took that
We
out.
took out, we took out, let's just stop, yeah, right, so this one we just removed outdoor.
2 pets, yeah, 2 pets.
2 pets, regardless of the lot size, and these animals apply towards total points.
Mhm.
So the smallest lots can have 2 animals.
And the people that have larger lots that have multiple dogs, if
Then
you
that
wanted
will
to
count.
expand, you're
So-
now up the creek.
Here's what they want to say, something like
3
this,
wiener dogs equals no.
if I'm not
that's
mistaken, here's what you want to say. Every lot may have 2 pets from the above table. It says 1019A, but I think it's 1018A.
1018A, yeah.
Regardless of lot size, these animals will apply toward total points. Indoor pets not listed may be permitted if their care and habitat is found adequate and suitable for the species. If an indoor household pet problem arises, city staff or law enforcement shall determine the corrective action as defined in Chapter 5 of the Elk Ridge City Code.
Which they said was redundant, so we just took it all out, right?
What was redundant? Oh,
An indoor pet problem, yeah.
yeah,
obviously,
because
we
that's
can do
what,
that.
that's what's really there, right? Pretty much. But that's what they wanted, that's what they think that.
That's all that was left when you take out the outdoor pet
Right,
and the indoor pet.
okay. Right.
That's where the confusion is what exactly
Brittany
is it?
approved the ordinance, exception removing
But then we
1A.
didn't do my motion.
We didn't do
My
her motion.
No, but that
Correct.
was the problem, is then I built on, I said everything in Brittany's motion, but
Correct.
changing this, and that's where the problem was.
That's where the
That's where
problem
the
is.
problem gets
Take
whacked.
Brittany's, I'll take this one. That's what
That's what I did, remember?
Because
I
it
was
says
like,
right
I'll
here,
take half of Brittany's
Brittany
and-
rescinded the motion. Okay, then we re-motioned it with the addition of cutting the points in half for hens, chickens, pigeons, ducks, pheasants, rabbits, chuckers, quails,
Yep, but not dogs and cats. I said
and
you
leaving
can
dogs
shut
and
up
cats
and-
unchanged.
Yep,
Mhm.
that's what I said.
That's what you said. No second.
Yep.
Then you, Tricia, said, here's the exceptions. Service animals don't count. Exotic animals allowed with license from the state of Utah, and all the licensing requirements are met. Cutting in half the points. Change the paragraph under 1018A to say every lot may have 2 pets regardless of lot size. We already covered that up here.
Yeah.
And remove limitless indoor pets. And you seconded it.
Cause earlier she had already gone down and halved everything, right? Including Nelson's pigeon nonsense. I'm just making sure that's what we agreed on,
I
right?
had half not cats and dogs, but when we did the
Yes.
final motion, cats
Then
and
I had
dogs were
half
half as well, yes.
Is that right?
That's right, yep.
You know, my dogs died, they're not being replaced, because I'm gonna be able to replace them.
You'll have to get rid of some
Because then I'll
pigeons.
be in violation of the code.
You'll have to get rid of some pigeons.
I'm
Just
not
don't
getting
tell
rid of
anybody
them.
that died, just one shows up,
No, you're grandfathered in, Nelson, you're
No, I'm,
grandfathered in.
as long as they're alive.
No, there is
On the
a-
dogs. On
This
the
just
dogs.
applies across the board.
Oh,
No, there is the,
No, well, we read
to
it. as-
replace it.
I mean, if you have a horse that died, you can replace it within a year.
can I replace a dog?
So 6 month, there's a 6 month.
It said all animals.
So like right now I could maybe go out and get some alpacas, even if I'm not, just kidding.
Okay, let's not get into that, let's just
I'm
get
just
this,
teasing him.
we- unless you wanna rehash this whole thing.
No, no.
Let's just
I-
clarify
We can find
what we
dogs.
did and make a motion.
Well, I
to
think
clarify.
it's clarified, it's from here down, none of that, rest of that even applies.
Yes, it does, because the animals were all in half. That was in
Right,
Brittany's
but
first
it's
motion.
in here.
It does,
It's in there,
cutting the
yeah.
points in half, but it didn't say anything about your,
Then 1018A also said
And you know
everybody
what?
may have 2 pets.
I am battle weary, tired,
Regardless
I
of lot
wanna move
size.
on. Let's move on.
Well, hold on, what
Because
does
it
our,
isn't-
They're
it's
just
not
trying to
what
get
does our
at
staff, what do you need us to clarify for the
No,
motion?
Royce, what do we need to clarify?
Let's just take it
This
one
is not
issue
a
at,
discussion,
no,
I'm not
one-
having a discussion.
one issue at a time
changing
of
what
what
we
we need
did.
to clarify.
All I want is the clarification of what we
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
want more clear on, actually go through it, this includes this, versus like before, we'll take Brittany's and that, so if we just
Okay,
list,
If we can just restate the motions
restate the motion, everything included or
with
excluded.
exactly the same thing.
Right there.
that's what I thought, but I did think not just cutting them in half. Whatever you had said, Nelson, was the table I was going with, because that's what Brittany
Yeah.
said, the table except for dogs and cats.
yeah,
Right.
and Nelson had recommended cutting him in half, that was his recommendation.
But
That was
the,
as close as we could get
I'm
to
talking about
holding
the
people
pigeons,
with larger
'cause he had
lots harmless
forced them,
Okay.
with the coaching.
Cut
Somebody
them to
please
half.
restate the motion.
right?
First of all, we
You
gotta
have to
rescind it.
redact the other one or
We have
whatever.
to
Rescind it.
rescind the previous motion.
Just a question, the points on both charts are being cut in half?
No,
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 because the larger one was already,
On A or on B?
A,
A, just A.
Why did you cut an A in half and not B?
B was already
because
reduced.
B was already
right.
matched up
Okay,
with
we're-
the changes.
We're not discussing it unless you guys wanna rescind it and start all over.
No.
Okay, so
I don't
Royce,
even wanna
And
rescind
again,
it, I
just say
think we
A,
should
if A is
just,
the only thing being cut in half, say A.
okay, so we're going to have a motion to
Rescind the motion.
rescind, what do we call it?
The previous.
Help me.
I'm questioning whether you want to rescind it.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
I don't wanna rescind it.
I think what I want you to do
I
is
think if
make
we
a motion
rescind
to
it, we're gonna have a
clarify,
whole discussion.
to clarify your previous
Thank
motion.
you, I like that.
And I don't think you want to rescind what.
Very good. Let's just clarify the previous motion. Thank you. I don't like that either.
Cause then they'll open up for a whole new discussion.
There it is.
Okay.
This is what you guys decided on, right?
You wanna make a motion to clarify?
Did you vote yea for it?
It clearly
You
wasn't
didn't.
clear last time.
I don't think you did.
No, I voted nay, everybody else voted yea on it.
No, he didn't.
No, Nelson voted.
It was a
Did
3
me and
to 2.
Nelson voted
So
nay?
can we ask Royce, are these statements on the bottom of this?
Yeah,
does
that's what I was gonna
everybody
say.
understand those?
I was the only one that voted no when we got to the final motion.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
Are these statements on the bottom, do you need additional clarification to these statements? If they make a motion, just reading those off,
Just reading
are those clear?
Those 5 things at the bottom.
Okay.
Yes.
So it goes to 5.
But that's an anomaly.
Are you gonna do pigeons? I just wanna know, I don't care, I just wanna make sure, cause when I made the motion, that was the understanding I had, was that we were taking Nelson's, what he had done.
So that's why.
And that's why we're clarifying, right?
That's
Because
exactly what happened.
that's what I thought I
Okay.
was doing.
Tell me
Okay.
that's what happened. Well, I guess not.
What
You're on
happened?
A.
We also changed
I'm on
the,
A. You're on A.
is that in there?
Pigeons.
Point structure, and that's in there, right?
And, well, we just said cutting in half, but
Cutting in
I
half.
should have said to take Nelson's table.
They can't change it.
Well, the only thing besides cutting in half is pigeons.
Yeah, that was the only one that wasn't,
Right?
yes.
So is that, before we make this motion to clarify, is that what everybody's understanding was when they voted on this motion?
Well,
The pigeons
that-
were
that was-
about.
That was my notes. I mean, that's why I pulled my,
Well, no, I just wanna make sure, so when I make the
Yeah.
motion to clarify, that we do it
You
appropriately
clarify.
to what everybody agreed
I
upon.
want 1 no and 4 yeses.
Yeah, I can make the
You
motion and
you
still
can
vote
have
no.
Or we did,
Okay,
You sure can.
okay,
or you have to start all over.
No.
what is the section, the animal code?
18, table 18.
Okay, hold on.
10-18.
10, 18. Okay, I will make a motion to clarify our animal code, section 10-18, as vote A,
That's the table.
that's the table, just ordinance 10-18, as voted on at our last city council meeting of August 29th. To clarify the following. August 22nd, 2017. Okay. Are we okay so far? To clarify the following. Table 1018A points will be as follows. Cats, 5. Dogs,
No.
cats are 10 or
oh,
20. We didn't change that.
Yes, we did.
Everything was
Yes, we
changed.
did. When I made the motion, I changed that. I have
Okay.
it.
and that's why I voted
Alright.
no on the motion.
Okay.
That's
All right.
why I voted no.
Okay.
Okay, cats,
That's right.
5.
Got it wrong.
Dogs, 10. Hen chickens, 2.5 points. Pigeons, 0.5. Ducks, 5. Pheasants, 2.5. Rabbits, 2.5. Chucker, 2.5. Quail, 2.5. The paragraph under table 10-18-A should read as follows. Every lot may have 2 pets from the above table 10-18-A, regardless of the lot size. However, comma, these animals will apply toward total points, period. Indoor pets not listed,
Yeah.
no, hold on. We didn't want anything,
Anything to do with indoor pets.
no, we had indoor pets included in the table count towards total points. And then,
No?
Yes.
yes, that is what we had.
Okay.
And then we had exceptions to this, or service animals do not count toward the total points granted for your lot. Exotic animals are allowed with a current license from the state of Utah, and all licensing requirements are met.
That covers.
That covers
Are we
everything.
clear? Are we clear? Are we clear?
Is that the complete paragraph?
Are we clear
Yeah,
on the
so-
paragraph under 18A?
So the only thing
It's-
we address with indoor pets is just indoor pets listed in table 10-18-A count towards total points. So if you have an indoor pet that's not listed in that table, such as
An iguana.
an iguana, that doesn't count towards your total points.
Okay. I
And in
second.
that first paragraph, we just removed out. Well, you've already read it, so.
I
All right,
just-
everybody's clear on the motion?
Yeah.
And you are, that's clear enough on record now that we can
We're good to clarify
put
that?
that together?
Okay.
Okay, and so we have a motion, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, now we're gonna have to do a roll call vote to make this modification, so we'll do a roll call vote, and we'll start with Paul.
Yes.
Paul's, yes.
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Brittany?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-1. And I don't know if Brittany wants to restate why she voted no. But-
She's being consistent. I mean, let's.
Just be
Yeah, I'm
consistent.
just being consistent with what we did last time.
I just want to
There.
give my council plenty of opportunity to
Dogs and
make sure
cats.
that.
But I'm okay making the motion to clarify what
Okay.
everybody on the council did last
So that
time,
we can
right?
proceed.
Yep.
Move on.
All right, we good? All right, let's go to some minutes. Let's look at the minutes for May 9th. Boy, that'll be a nasty minutes to reprove. For that night.
How do you turn the lights on in the pavilion? Are they on a timer?
Yes.
Yeah, they're on a timer.
I'm just getting a text about that right now.
It's on a timer, but it's
This
not
goes back quite a ways, this is
sensitive.
celebration.
Yeah, that's all.
So I don't know if anybody has any discussion, but if you are ready to make a motion, then we can certainly take that.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes for May 9th, 2017.
Second.
I'll second it.
Bill seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, June 13th.
I found one little mistake.
Okay, what is it?
Page 6, line 18, when we went out to look at the lawnmower, it says the council went to go see the landscaping. I think we went to see the lawnmower, not the
We did.
landscape.
We didn't go to see the
Oh,
lawn.
they put lawnmower.
You put landscaping to the lawnmower.
I didn't do all of these.
And I want to make sure through the motions that you have thoroughly read them, because we've had other staff take, because of the changeover with personnel, have taken over minutes. So some of these people were not here at the meeting. So, you know, if there's things like that, definitely point them out, because
Yeah.
Well,
it's going on the record.
and so it says I wasn't at this meeting
May
either.
9th, yeah, you were
Was I
Wait,
gone?
not me, not, were you?
But I remember going out to see the mower.
June 13th.
I was gone
Well,
the
thi-
day, I
this
was
is
gone the
June
day we
3rd.
voted on the mower.
This
We're
is
talking
June.
about May 9th.
Yeah, this is after we got it.
This
No,
is
this-
after,
we're talking about
we're on
June
June 13th, we
We're on
just
June
did,
13th.
we just did May 9th.
I know, but that's the one where you just made the.
No,
No,
that was
the
June
I-
13th.
Oh,
I
okay.
said-
Weren't you at
I
a
said
family
June
reunion
13th.
then?
May 9th.
No,
No,
he's
no,
on
no.
the June 13th.
June 13th.
Okay,
June
June 13th,
13th.
that's,
Page
It's
yeah,
on
6,
page
line 18.
6, line 18.
yeah, so
Any other-
tonight, on May 9th, I'm gonna abstain from voting, because I wasn't there.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, I thought we were still on May 9th.
No, we made a motion to pass it on May 9th.
Well, then I thought he was saying that he wanted to edit.
No.
Sorry.
Just for
We went to June 13th.
I'm behind, gotcha.
That's the only thing I found.
We, anytime.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for June 13th, 2017.
Second.
With the exception.
With the change from landscape to lawnmower.
Okay. Second. Al seconds it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll just abstain, I haven't read, I didn't read through the minutes.
You what?
No, I didn't catch
I
that.
didn't read through the minutes, I'll abstain.
So
from
you're
voting.
abstaining?
Mhm.
So 4-1. 4 to abstain. All right, June 27th.
I was gone. Because my son broke the tree.
This was our budget,
And it's
final,
like,
final budget. You're not.
yeah, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Kind of sad I
The
missed it.
dang tree.
I don't have any corrections.
Just double checking. I made notation, I don't see anything in here. All right, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for June 27th, 2017.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm not
I'm
saying.
gonna abstain.
1 abstention.
2.
2 abstention.
Mm.
You weren't there either?
No, I was there, I haven't read
Oh,
through the
you
minutes.
never read through it. Okay. Motion carries then. All right, July 11th, 2017.
Okay, I'm gonna make a motion to approve the minutes for July 11th, 2017. Is there a second?
All seconds, and all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll abstain.
And you abstain, 1 abstention. All right. Oh my goodness, we got through our agenda.
No, back to the
How
top.
about
No,
that?
back to the works.
So I'll take a motion to conclude our regular session and
Work session.
go back into work session.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to conclude our regular city council session and go back into our work session.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor? No, sorry, you seconded it?
Well, Trish was seconding.
Oh, you
so
seconded
that's
it.
fine.
Do you second it?
We
It
both were-
doesn't
that's
matter.
okay.
I'm throwing
Trish,
you the ball
she
now.
seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We're done with our regular session. All right. All right. All right, since this is my opportunity since I get to set the agenda, and the work session can be fairly flexible, I'm gonna interrupt our regular scheduled work session to discuss our library issue. How's that?
I'm okay with that.
Is that okay with that?
Yeah, let's start with that.
Now, I want Royce to pitch in and Laura to pitch in because they've done some calling around. We don't have all of the information yet. We're going to reserve this conversation for the next session. But since we have a concerned resident, we'll at least identify a little bit of what we know and some of the direction in which I think we're thinking about, right? So maybe Royce or Laura, you could just recap a little bit about where we are, right? But again, we're not done with this process, okay?
I called the Salem Library, talked to the librarian down there, who is the daughter of the
Ray
gentleman.
Lovelace, yes.
Lovelace. And the rates that Elk Ridge as a non-citizen would get in Salem are actually less, they're lower than what residents, because the residents are paid by their property taxes. So we would actually pay less, so that she said, she wouldn't say one way or another, but she said, I have a feeling they would not tend to approve a discount because it's already lower. She said, but with that being said, my father is such and such, Raymond Lovelace, and he was none too happy that Payson, who is not customers of SCSD, is getting help with their library, and thought maybe we should approach him. As being customers, we may have a favorable position in getting some help with maybe even paying for the bookmobile, something like that.
Well,
That's
just
what
so you
it's
know,
saying.
the bookmobile was $2,800, I think it is, because the county charged us, so, was going to charge. Okay, sorry.
And that's what I got from Salem. I mean, if somebody wanted to pursue further in pushing that to see if we can get a discount after, what she said, we could always try, but she thought with her best guesstimate, that would probably go nowhere.
So let me ask, what's your name again?
Beth Wilson.
Beth, let me ask you. How would you feel about a library card at Salem as opposed to the bookmobile?
I think another city would be great.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think they have a similar thing where you can call ahead, reserve any book you want. They'll make sure it's on the shelf for you, right?
Yeah,
So
you just gotta drive to one.
So you can have that same
Right.
kind of experience.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you get more visits if
We
you
were
want.
we moved down from Salt Lake County, so it was just great up there.
Yeah.
That you have one card for the whole county.
Mhm.
You can go anywhere, anytime. So I was a little disappointed when we came back to Utah County.
Yeah.
But having, a physical library that you can visit is wonderful because there's so many more resources.
Yeah.
The bookmobile is great. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's a different experience.
Wasn't there someone who said that either here or at that meeting, the Spanish Fort, that they had patronized the Spanish Fort Library, and that they were easy to work with?
They're easy to work with. I would like something closer, something that's less out of the way. The bookmobile is very convenient in that way, right? But we all end up in Salem. You don't go out of Elkridge without coming pretty close to the library if you're going to head out on Freeway. Unless you go to Edison.
North, it's
Spanish is probably a little bigger,
A little bigger, but you get anything you want pretty
facility,
much at Salem.
you know.
So the question I had, because so I don't want I don't want to leave our residents without some commitment from the city. This is the mayor talking, you guys get to vote, of the importance of having access to the library. I think that from my personal view, right, I think there's great value in that. Yeah, I do everything I do online, right? But I'm not a big novel reader and those kind of things, and even if I was, I'd probably go online. But the experience for younger kids and everything, I think it's a wonderful experience, and I want to be a city that promotes that kind of experience and learning and you know what I'm saying? So are we thinking, and so I want to move on this. I want to know how we can go forward, because I don't like leaving our residents kind of on their own.
Well, I agree with this.
Do we just encourage them, say, go to the library and get a card? Do we subsidize it for them and put something back of it? Or are you wanting to re-up with the bookmobile?
Well, so I mean, with the Salem Library, one library card is $25, so right? But if you want a library card, I mean, is that per household? I think that's just per library card, correct?
I don't know how
Did you
to
find out?
I don't. I didn't ask about what the $25 was for, if it was a card. In
For
my
a
experience,
family
they're
or
all
for a-
family cards. Because I've had library cards in other places, but I didn't ask, but I can find out if you want to.
Okay, because I mean, I think that'd be interesting to know, because basically the price for the bookmobile, if it's like for a family, basically for the bookmobile, we had about 68 users for the bookmobile, which could be like 68 families. For the same price of the cost of the bookmobile, we could pay for 112 cards at Salem Library. And so that doubles the amount of people that were using the bookmobile that the city could pay for.
Right.
And I mean, if we went to a subsidy, then we could allow even 4 times as many people that were using the bookmobile to have access to Salem Library
Now,
for the same cost.
the other part of this
right?
equation,
Or something.
I talked with Ray last night, and he was reading an email, and he was gonna send it to me, but I think he got distracted because he was going in for surgery today.
No.
So I didn't get the email from him, but he went through the data, the number of people that are utilizing Salem's library from Elk Ridge and Woodland Hills. And there are more people utilizing Salem's library from Elk Ridge and Woodland Hills than there are people utilizing Payson's library right now, by Payson
Alright.
residents.
So-
Based on the information that I was given yesterday.
Do you know how many residents are currently using
I
Salem's
don't
Library?
know.
Because
It
if we're
was-
gonna subsidize, that'd be an issue, because then if we
Right.
think, okay, we only had 68 families that are using bookmobile,
There
but
were-
we already have 100 that are using the library that
Again,
have
I'm
on a
kinda
subsidy,
shooting from the
right?
hip here, because I'm trying to remember, but I think last year there were 700 and some odd books checked out in Salem by residents of Elk Ridge and Woodland Hills. They don't have a way to track it by city, because it's either you're a resident or you're a non-resident.
See, the
But-
bookmobile, we were checking out about 2,000 books a year.
Yeah. I mean, so clearly we're utilizing that more than some of the neighboring communities. I tend to think that maybe we ought to sit down and see what we can do that way. Now, a question I had for Royce, were you able to get the meeting scheduled for next Monday yet, have we heard back?
I've confirmed that we can do it, but.
But we haven't heard back? Okay. The only reason I'm bringing that up is there's a possibility that we'll be meeting with Payson on some other issues, and maybe we can bring this up and just kind of fill them out, because what the library board or the head librarian wants versus what the mayor and their council will or won't do are gonna be probably two entirely different things.
Well, we can unilaterally just say, go get a library card from Salem and we'll pay for it.
Yeah.
We don't have to talk to the
No, we
city
don't.
in Salem,
We
right?
don't.
Unless we think we're gonna get a better deal.
But if we're gonna do that, and all of a sudden they've got more people utilizing it, maybe if we look at it from the standpoint of a bulk amount, there may still be some room for negotiation, because the reality of it is, you're gonna have a lot of people who are going to get a library card, and they'll go check 1, 2, or 3 books, and they may not go back, and then there are others who are avid readers who, as soon as they finish one book, they've already got the next book in mind, and they've already got it. I mean, honestly, the last time I set foot in the library was in high school. I didn't even go in the library in college, so.
discussed it.
So I don't know.
But, you know, I mean, it's, everybody's different. But I think we
But
need
wait,
to
why are we
provide
putting
that.
pressure on SESD who is not donating?
No.
Why, what,
SCSD is paying for Payson's library.
yeah, who
Well,
isn't a customer and we
there's,
are.
there was
So
some,
why can't they pay for a bookmobile? SESD,
because
Nelson?
we're working on that.
Yeah, I
We
think
are working on that.
that's the route I wanna go. Let's get that funded by
But-
them.
We're working on it, but I can tell you right now, they're not gonna pay for the whole bookmobile. That won't, that amount, they wouldn't contribute that level
Well,
because
what are they donating to Basin?
$280
Oh.
over the course of a whole year. 280 bookmobile, I mean,
Well,
we're talking
It's
like
only
10%.
one order of magnitude, that's not a big deal.
Yeah, I said, can we move the decimal point thing? It was like definite silence, so,
Dang it.
but one of our employees is now on the library board there. So,
Well, I don't wanna put my eggs in
I don't want to
in
either.
this
I don't
SESD.
either. I don't either, and I
Right?
think that we need to.
If we can get
probably-
SESD to reimburse us, it'd be great,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't have to upfront pay it, if they would be willing to just look at what our city's
True.
doing, and that we
Well,
could have them do.
And from the standpoint
Whatever
of
they
this,
would.
they're more inclined to do something that benefits, because most of their customers live outside of the areas that have libraries. You got Woodland Hills, Elk Ridge, Spring Lake, West Mountain,
Don't they have
Right.
Benjamin?
and Benjamin, part of Benjamin, and Lake Shore. So you've got all these areas that are in the unincorporated. Now, some of them have access to the bookmobile, but it's,
Okay,
in
so
reality, there's
I
probably.
wanna get this actionable, because I don't like where we are. Do we want, even if we went to SESD and say, hey, will you front some help this cost? And we can say, we've already spent this much, and they might say, well, we'll give you a couple $100 or whatever. We'll take whatever we get,
Well, sure,
right?
and I have no
But
problem.
what do
with
we do now? What do we
So-
do, 'cause
Right,
our
like-
city's without any kind of formal library guidance, right?
So-
What do we wanna
Sorry,
do?
go ahead.
What is your relationship like with Mayor Brailsford at this point? I mean, you know,
I know him. I'm not
Well, I
gonna
know
go
him
get
too,
anything
but
out
I
of
mean,
it.
it's, yeah,
Not
I wondered,
getting out of it.
I wondered if.
He's gonna
Go
say,
that
well, you're
route,
already
we
getting a
just-
big break.
Well, and that's what I'm wondering, if we just go in and say, okay, we'll do X amount. Or we'll pay in this much
We set aside this much and,
in our budget. I
But
mean, we're gonna have to
currently, we don't have
amend the
any
budget.
set aside.
how often do you use the library?
Since we came, we've been going to the bookmobile, you know,
Every-
regularly.
Every visit mostly?
Yeah, and I'm an avid reader myself, so I use the online resources mostly, but, you know,
Yeah.
consumer reports, not just,
Well, plus young
fiction.
kids and stuff,
yes.
fun to have a real book
When,
with
with,
pictures.
with my kids, before we moved to Elk Ridge, right, and we had access to a library, and we were in a county that you could access all the libraries, it was weekly. Because I think with young readers, they just go through the books like this, and it's so important to have, I mean, we have a huge library at my house. I mean, floor to ceiling, entire rooms at the, right? But my kids read so much, in a summer, they've read everything in their age group that's age appropriate for them.
Okay, so. let me
Right,
ask-
so I mean, so we go to the library weekly with little kids, and I think, I mean, our users with the library were kind of either with little kids or kind of on the older end. There wasn't a lot of like
Do you know
teenage-
when you go to the library, do they give you a record of the books you checked out?
Like your past history. I've never received that from a library. I don't know.
Just
I wouldn't know
checks
how to
it out.
access that as a patron.
Because if you could figure out a way to say, you know, if you're a regular user, city will buy your library card, right? For the, if it's a family. If you're gonna go down and you got a research project and you're gonna go down the library once, then I'm not interested in subsidizing that, right?
Well, that's what I'm wondering, if we subsidize, if we said, okay, if the families pay 15 and the city pays 10, because then only people
They've got
who are
buy-in.
really going to use it are gonna be willing to pay that
I'm good with
$15,
that.
right? So that,
And we set a max, we set a limit, a budget,
Yeah, like only so many.
right?
right, and you can come,
$2,000.
yeah, and you can come to the city and say, look, I want my library card, you know what I mean? So just
Right.
a little process, and you pay your 15.
Do we set that up with Salem, or do we have them bring in their thing?
I don't care where you go, you could go get a library card from the Moon and we'll pay $10 of it.
But no, she's wondering how
Right.
the implementation of it is going to happen.
Whether
Right?
they buy the card there,
They buy
and
it.
we reimburse it.
So
we
you
reimburse
buy the card and you bring it in and say, I just bought a card at Salem City Library.
Royce has
Here's-
got facial expressions
Royce,
that
well, that's-
are whirling in his brain.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, because then you're making a payment to all these individuals,
Oh, yeah.
or if you just pay it to the city library. If you say to Salem Library, we will,
Well, then they have to do the accounting.
right, right,
They're gonna do that.
that's what I'm saying.
Could you bring it in and
I
get a credit on your bill?
Yeah, that may be a better way to do it.
No, probably not.
No,
It's gonna hit
because it's
different
utilities
above.
versus
Yeah,
Because then you're,
funding.
you're robbing Peter.
Okay, so,
So implementation is just, what if we did this? What if we said to Salem, we'll pay you like, I don't know, 200, whatever, $500, and then our residents come in and they pay a $15 fee until that $500 runs out.
if they'll do that.
That might work. Let's-
I mean,
We can find that.
something
Do we-
like that, and
Do
they
they have
can,
do they have a credit department at the library? All right, so we'll check into that.
yeah, I mean, we need to
Figure
just
out a
check
way to do
into,
it.
We'll check into that.
So I think Spencer had a comment that he'd like to.
Yeah, so, kind of going back to the beginning, talking about if you needed a card for the whole family or multiple cards. One card is good for the family as long as the card holder is there to check out the items.
Okay.
So for instance, my wife has the card, and so whatever we get for my boys or for me, it's on her card.
And that probably works, right?
So really, you can count on 20, was it $12.50 per 6 months or 25 years per year, and it's pretty much per family, so.
All right, so we'll check in to see if they'll let us just prepay so much and let people come in and get their cards. And then that's what we'll put out and encourage the residents to do.
I think that would work.
We'll get a lot
easiest.
more mileage out of it, probably.
Well, and,
money.
and here's a thought that may go along with it in regards to the librarian. If they call and ask for a list of the businesses in our community so that they can contact them for sponsorships and things, if we're free flowing with that information, it may go a long ways.
Are you usually not?
I mean, no, but I mean, if we have a listing of
I don't know if we
businesses
can do
or,
that.
well, it's no different than what they do in Payson
How
at
do
the
you,
chamber.
would you be
And they provide
satisfied
that.
if we just said, go down to Payson or Salem and get a card and they'll give you a $10 credit from the city for your family?
I think that for a small town like ours, cooperating with someone else is probably a good route. More resources,
Yeah.
I would guess. I mean, the bookmobile's great, like I was impressed with what they had available on demand. But Salem's very, very close. I know I've spoken to a number of my neighbors regarding this, and a lot of them have lived in other places in Utah County and they still have their cards and they're like, well, I just go there still.
And that works.
But if, Salem was feasible, they might say, hey,
Well, I think
let's go closer.
this is probably our best option right now,
Yeah.
honestly, and we'll,
And we can revisit it in like a year now, or something, right? See how it's
Yeah.
working, see.
we certainly could review it, if they'll work with us on this, so I think maybe that's the direction we ought to try to go. Sounds about the simplest we can do.
Sure.
I think we can do like $500 or $1,000, and we don't really have to have any approval from the council. I mean, you know what we're gonna do, because I think 2,000's we have to find the money somewhere though. So we'll have to find the money somewhere, might have to move a little around. Is that okay? If we go down that, everybody buy in on this?
No. I'm gonna take some fire trucks.
Okay.
I'm good with it. I mean, I'm not gonna use it, but.
I'm not gonna use it.
You know what, other people will.
I,
use it, but-
like I said,
That's
I would
the
be willing
thing,
personally.
I think if we fund part of it, then only people who are going to use it are
Well,
going
Yeah.
to get a card.
Exactly. All right, so we'll do that research and try to get something in place, and we'll message it out to the residents. Sorry for canceling the bookmobile, but at $2,800, that's,
An
it wouldn't,
unexpected
doesn't sound like a
expense.
lot, but with our little budget, right?
It's a lot for the fire
It's a
department.
lot,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
By
That's
the
a
way,
lot to
Billy
me.
said he'd come talk with us
Yeah.
if we wanted. He finally
Yes, it is.
Did he?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's real money.
on Friday, he sent me a message
So
saying.
why don't they do like Salt Lake County?
Well, they're trying to do it on the north end of Utah County right now. So you got Lehigh, American Fork,
Oh,
Highland,
yeah, leave
Alpine.
us out there,
So-
don't they?
No,
So,
but
so here's the thing,
they've
if you
already
guys
got
wanna
the
talk with
fire
him, he offered to
together,
either
so.
meet in his office in Provo or to come to Elk Ridge. Because
Oh,
we've
no.
been, I've
You know
had
what? I
a
think it'd
couple
be good-
discussions with Commissioner Lee, and I've talked with Graves
It'd be
and
good for him
Ivy,
to come
so
here. You know, Nathan
So-
Ivy's been here, he hasn't been here.
if you guys would like, I can set that up.
Question, could somebody explain to me on the, going back to the animal rights, why chart A is now cut in half and chart B is not? What that makes is people that have animal rights, our animals are now 60% more expensive than those people that didn't have animal rights, that now are graciously endowed animal rights, plus at a 60% discount compared to those that actually have animal rights. That makes no sense whatsoever. I know none of you have animal rights, no
So-
offense, but you have to take in perspective those that do, that did pay for them, and now you're charging them
just tried to
60% more than everybody else.
Didn't you just
No.
try to keep it in line
I
so
tried
it
to
was?
make it so that it matched up, so if it's
With
off
what you
with
had
the
now.
larger lots, to match the current code, if it's off, let me know, send me an email.
We'll adjust it.
We'll adjust it, because that was.
So
not
work
the
with
intent.
Nelson.
Work with me.
Work
okay?
with Nelson.
You-
The
you know, you
intent
can
was
email
to
me,
keep
we'll
the
get
same
it
animal
figured out.
rights for like Nelson on
Because
his property.
on
Right,
my
not me,
third
not
acre,
my
yeah.
property, his property.
Meet with Nelson.
Well, I'm just saying, a dog was 20 points in chart A, now it's 10 points. A
Yeah.
dog in chart B is 16 points. It's a 60%
Okay, meet with
increase for a
Nelson.
dog.
Yeah.
Because the intent is not to,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
not
yeah.
penalize
We're not,
anybody.
we're not trying to penalize
Meet
those
with
that
Nelson,
have.
we're gonna
Where
go
were
on.
you when we passed it, huh?
What's that?
Okay, animals are done,
I've been.
so work with
Well,
Nelson.
we'll clarify it.
Bring it back.
We-
He was
Let's get back to the boundary,
his home goofing.
urban wildland boundary.
No, he wasn't on there.
Actually, I've got it.
You gotta run?
Okay.
Okay.
We're just.
No decision tonight, Dale, so we're just
Okay.
gonna have the discussion on it.
Yeah, well, it was good to have the discussion and get the input from the
Who wants to start?
Let's just move the line
Well,
all the way out like they said.
My feeling
We're out.
is,
He said the recommendation was the whole city.
Yeah, so let's go
his
then.
recommendation, and they said whatever the fire chief said would probably go right through.
Yeah,
Shay?
and fire chief said the whole city, right?
You smiled.
And he said the whole
That's what I
city.
heard.
My personal opinion, honestly, in looking at this, is the whole city.
I mean,
Why?
have you been down to
Why
the
the whole city?
neighborhood?
No, tell me why you think those.
First of all, my neighbors that have the biggest lot in my neighborhood have chosen not to do anything with their backyard, it's just straight grass. That grass from where the retaining thing is, or whatever, all the way up that walking path, if that catches on fire, I don't care who had, you know what I mean, like, because they say there's grass and stuff, it's gonna go straight up. There is field everywhere.
So, do sprinkler systems make you feel better for that?
Yeah, if it, say my house started on fire, right? And because my neighbor's yard isn't finished, what if it did end up catching their yard on fire? They're going straight all the way up.
I think
I'm
sprinklers
trying to separate the
address,
two issues.
I know,
I wanna
I
make
think
sure that we.
sprinklers address a separate issue. I think
That's what I'm
sprinklers,
asking. I'm asking for two
sprinklers
issues
protect
here.
fire starting inside and not fire starting outside.
Right.
But it would keep your house, wouldn't it? No, it's not
Keep
gonna
your
do
house from
anything.
starting.
No, residential sprinkler systems are designed for life safety with structural fires.
Okay.
They're located in most living spaces, not all. Like was mentioned earlier, they don't sprinkle the attic. Small closets don't get sprinkled, and there's some other spots that don't.
Small bathrooms, right?
Yes, small
No, that's
bathrooms.
not true. My parents had to have one where their shower was.
If it's
That's
over
certain
55 square feet.
Depends on square foot.
That's a pretty small bathroom.
Yeah.
5 by.
Well,
In
not
the
really.
shower room,
5 by
they had
10.
to have one, where the
So
shower
it's
is.
a
55
mudroom
square
kind of
feet
thing, yeah.
is, if it's above 55 square feet, then you have to have a sprinkler in it. But a wildland fire going through, it's going to start the outside of the structure on fire.
Right.
And your sprinklers inside are.
No, we're talking two issues. We
Yeah.
wanna make sure we're talking the preventative, where fire starts in the
But I'm
house and
saying, I think
spreads
that
out.
just
Right,
like the
okay,
red zone.
so if it
area.
starts
Right?
in the house, then
And
it
she
will
just,
do.
that's the one she brought up. She said,
That
if a
will-
fire starts in my house, it's gonna catch that field on fire, and
Yeah.
everything's gonna go out,
And that's
right?
true for the most part, as long as the fire doesn't start in the attic
Right.
or some other spots not sprinkled. But the residential sprinklers are in most areas where you're going to get a fire. The
Probably
code, the
kitchens.
NFPA code does not require sprinklers in garages, but Seth has put out a memo, I guess, that the city does require a sprinkler in the garages. So I think that's a good
Good
thing to
addition.
have. Yes, absolutely.
So what I asked you, I said, does sprinkler systems, because that's what,
That's why we're having this
As soon as
conversation.
you draw those boundaries and say the whole city's encompassed, we're really talking about in those lower areas, not the risk necessarily as big as the fire coming off the hillside or somewhere else and catching your house on fire, but your house catching on fire and blowing out
Yeah.
and spreading the fire.
Yeah,
to
the
some other
different
place,
city's
right?
gonna be in it for different reasons,
Exactly.
Yeah.
right?
So I'm trying to separate the two issues to make sure I understand why we think it's important for sprinklers, right?
Okay, let me,
In the whole town.
let me put it this way, and I could give you a whole list of reasons, but as I sit here and think about it, and part of my discussion as I've tried to educate myself on this has been sitting down with Seth too and talking about what are the capabilities here
Mhm.
with the fire department. Okay, if you look at the current state code the way it's written, and look at what they're basically saying in that code, if you take out that wildland urban growth boundary and you look at the times, the situations where sprinklers are allowed outside of that, we don't meet any of those. We have an adequate road system
Yep.
that has
Yep.
we've got fire hydrants every 450 feet everywhere where we've got developed areas.
We don't have slopes on our
So we
roads more
don't-
than so long. that's such a
Exactly.
pitch.
So when you look at it from that perspective, you're going, well, wait a second, why do we do this at all?
Right.
But I think the part of this argument that's really valid is what Seth brings up, that there's a good part of the day, every week, that you don't even have enough people to send a crew out immediately.
Right.
So what happens in that case is you have this fire, it goes off in the middle of the day, you have somebody show up, but until Payson or somebody, or Salem or somebody else, whoever your interlocal agreements are with, until they show up, you can't do anything, you can't fight it. So you're 10 minutes, 15 minutes out before you have people
Is that
on
what it is,
site.
15
You're
minutes?
then, again, from there, literally, 3 to 5 minutes before the hoses are out and water's flowing.
Yeah.
And I think that's something, I realize the state code doesn't address that,
Mhm.
but I think that's a critical issue.
Yeah.
And I just look at this as, and here again, that's going back to the sprinklers, saying, well, by creating this boundary, we're allowing the sprinklers, or we're, we can require those sprinklers everywhere. I also look at it as, you had somebody here from Department of Forestry, or Division of Forestry, that looks at this and says, and makes that recommendation.
Okay, so
That this whole community should be in that. The more that I study this, I'm getting really, it really bothers me when I hear all these people complain about the costs. Because when somebody comes in and says, no, this cost adds 20% more to the structure, with what's being built here, if you're looking at something,
No, I'm
if
not
you're looking
saying
at something
that.
in some other area, that may be true, but with what's currently being built up here, we're talking about $5,000 to $10,000 is what we're talking about, an additional cost.
I would
by-
disagree, and I guess it's maybe my understanding of it, but the county, with what's like implemented up Hollow Creek, where we've done custom homes and stuff, I guess this could be a point that could be brought up too, is there could be varying degrees of the implementation of the code, right? So the code that I'm looking at, when they say WUI, I'm usually looking at the Utah County, what's been adopted there.
Sure.
And
And
maybe
they
that's
said
more
those codes
stringent.
are more stringent than the
okay,
state
theirs is more
requires.
I think
So-
you're
so-
just talking about the cost of the sprinkler system.
Okay,
Well,
so.
and I'm not talking about, I'm talking about the overall cost.
Including any modifications to
As
the
I
building
as I
system.
said, if you
All
go
right,
down
all
through,
right,
if you
all
go
right,
down
I just wanna
through the
make sure.
list of what's required in the state code, what's generally there, it has to do with venting. The venting costs, it may add $100 or $200 because you've got it's slightly different.
But don't they have to change the whole eave structure and everything?
Well,
It
so.
is, but you've got a different, you're using a different type of, the whole structure there is slightly different. But a lot of people are already doing that, because one of the things that homeowner or home builders try to sell them on is that if you get these trusses that just so happens work with a different type of venting, you can carry your insulation over the sides of the edges of your walls.
Oh, out on the.
And so then you don't have this narrow gap there where you have no insulation, so it makes your home tighter.
Okay.
I know when I built my home, that
So,
was
Jared?
for a
So
couple
full
$100.
implementation,
Go for it.
and this could be different than what the WUI code is statewide versus
Right.
county.
Right.
Okay, up Hollow Creek, you have to have a whole perimeter sprinkler system. Sprinklers out at the edge of the yard that spray the forest.
Right.
Okay, some of those lines are 1.5 to 2 inch lines.
Right.
So you're looking at road cuts, whatever that way. Some of the components of the exterior, if you're using something that's treated or whatnot, you can get away with it, and then guess what? You're doing exterior sheetrock, dense glass on the outside of the building to kind of make up for that, or you go strictly non-combustible. Okay, so you look at full-on masonry versus some of the stuccos you see down here. If it says Synergy on the bucket or whatever, it's usually a synthetic, and it's actually can burn. And what's behind it? Tar paper, foam. I mean, those things all burn. So I guess maybe there's some confusion on my part, and I think you guys, when I was saying 20%, 30%, that's full-on implementation in Utah County, what's been adopted, say, up Hollow Creek. So that's maybe there's some confusion there. So I guess you can look at how you want to implement it.
Sure.
You can do a phased implementation, right?
Right.
Somebody brought up the thing of doing some points. You got a fencible area.
That's
you do
actually the point
And that's-
You
and
get so
that's-
much that, and then it's specific.
Right.
But I do agree that I think whatever happens, I think you ought to make sure the sprinklers are in it. So that's.
And that's part of the point here. There's a difference in what we're both talking about here.
Yeah.
And one is, he's talking about an area that has no fire lines to it. You're basically building out in the middle of the forest. And if you go in, like you saw as you were looking at the state code, there's a table in there.
Yep.
And you fill out the table, you go down through and check
Find out the
things
number of
off.
points you have, and then
And
that kind of
you
tells
look
you
at
what
that, and then it
class
tells
you're
you
in.
what, and
Most of ours-
most of what we have in here,
Yeah.
a lot of the things that we've already been doing, a lot of the things that people are already doing on their homes.
Well,
is-
most of what we
is
require
part
as
of
a
this.
city. Fire hydrants, ingress and egress separate, right, or two-way, roads that aren't steeper than 10 feet on a one-way road, more than 500 feet. All these things play into that, right?
So I
And
guess.
it lowers your risk.
I guess as I look at this,
Evaluation.
I'm just looking at it going, the cost difference for what we're building here, with the development that we have that occurs here,
Yeah.
is not much more.
Because you don't have to do the full
Yeah.
on,
Unless somebody came and said, I'm
Mitigation.
putting a house clear up
Right.
there.
Well,
We're up there in the
We're
county.
right
Down
around
there,
the
they're
wall.
just putting sprinklers in, that's it, right?
Right,
Down
and
where
then,
it's not clear, right
Well,
there. Up at the top.
the two issues are, where do we want to require sprinklers? And in that area where sprinklers are required, which is the, what is
interface
it,
area.
Wally code or
Woolly.
Wally area?
WUI is W.
Woolly area.
Urban interface.
Wildland urban.
Urban, yeah.
Wildland
So-
urban.
Then we look at the building codes, right, and say within that area, what additional things do we need to add in our code to address the concerns that we have, that we are already addressing based on how we already require fire hydrants and roads and all the things that they had talked about
Yeah,
in
you
that
need to
document.
define the line, and I guess you need to define which WUI code you're putting
Right.
in there.
That's what you have to do.
That's what it is.
Or it's,
Or
or
if it's
one really
implemented.
here because of the higher point system and one over here, right?
Yeah.
Because I can see where if you start developing the south side of town, right,
Oh, yeah, it's gonna get a lot more.
where you may want to include a little more of this, right?
Well,
and
because
that's-
they're 1 acre lots, right? And so you're gonna have not as much defensive, you're gonna have more natural vegetation
Yeah, well,
because
vegetation, right.
that's
More embers flying.
more,
But
right?
if our
So,
code is such that they have to clear the
Yeah,
vegetation away
the
from home and things like that, there's
development,
ways
I mean, if
to
they're-
address
Yeah,
it.
that's true.
I mean, you,
But they address the types of fuel, the code addresses the kinds of fuel, the proximity to the fuel, the lot sizes, and,
Yeah.
you know, all the various kinds of things, so it's not like.
And that's what they said, you can pick and choose on your mitigation efforts depending on which number you are,
But our-
is how much you have to do.
But our code only says,
No, we need to get our code in line.
there's only one level.
And my,
Right?
yeah, my
Right now.
recommendation, and honestly, back in 1996, that was probably the latest and greatest.
Yes, agreed.
A lot of this is, I mean, if you even look at building codes between then and now, there's been huge changes. So my recommendation would be that, I mean, we need to review it, but that we generally adopt the state's model ordinance
Right.
for this interface area, and then we apply it across the board, because here again, that has that checklist in there,
Yep.
and that's what they bring forward. Everybody would bring that forward, and if we have a developer on the north end that, based on, you know, he doesn't have open space running down through there, based on the design, that
Nothing special
there's
in the
not
building
there's
code.
not a high risk there, then he's going to be developing something that is very close to just the general building code.
Traditional.
And if we have
Well,
somebody on the
I-
south end, then they'll develop to a higher standard, build to a higher
I
standard.
do remember reading somewhere that if you put that line in there, that you can actually implement code up to, it was like within a half mile or something of that line. I mean, it doesn't have to be, here's the line, here you
Right.
go. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember reading that somewhere.
The only thing in the state thing talks about the sprinkler systems can be required.
Yeah, so
They have
We
to
could
be-
set
they
the
have to
other
be
stuff
behind the
based
boundary.
on, I like having data driven personally, so that we don't get into a lot of.
would less likely to have legal challenges.
You know
I
what?
just like data driven.
Where the Forest Service recommends the entire city is in the area, our fire chief recommends the entire city be in the urban area, the wildlife interface urban area. Those are the two professionals, and they're both recommending the entire city, right? I don't know fires, I don't know how they flow, right? That's not my area of thing, but if the two experts are both saying your whole city should be in the wildland urban interface area, I think that should
But
be our
you have to
designated
tie,
map.
you have to tie this to the wildland urban interface area.
Right,
Because you can't just say, just because I can suppress a fire, won't catch my field next to me on fire, right? That doesn't give you justification. Because otherwise, Payson and West Valley and everybody else could require fire sprinklers, which the state specifically said you can't.
well, no, so we can't, I mean,
Right?
we
So you have to tie it to the fact that we are in or near a interface zone, right?
well, that's the thing, the only thing, I mean, we need to do our building code to get up to date with the wildland.
Yeah, I'm not worried
urban
about that
interface,
so much,
right?
'cause we can
But-
do that.
But this section, all we need to do is get our map submitted to the forestry division.
I understand,
they'll
but I gotta
approve it.
justify it.
Right, no, and
We all have to justify it.
right, and I guess my justification is, the two experts both recommend the entire
Well,
city.
So my justification is
And-
that our city's red.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot
well,
of red.
I'm just gonna say, not only red, but half of our city is the highest rating, half of our city.
I know this.
And that's an old map before all the growth on the north end.
And that's what I was gonna say, this was 2008.
2008 when all those were.
Likely to get red.
And I understand what Brianne said, but the other people I've talked to have basically said that value of the homes runs that risk higher, and it becomes the controlling factor, and very likely it'll move right down through all that development.
Well, one thing I would point out, if I may, going back to like Seth's point with the house, the backyard that burned earlier this year. That
Was that my yard?
Yeah, that's what they're talking about.
Thanks for the
It
example.
wasn't me though.
The day you moved in.
We
No,
appreciate it.
that was my neighbor above me. I was the guy below, but I got the fence.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate you
Okay.
providing an example for us.
Yeah, so the neighbor above you, that happened fairly early on in the spring, and there was quite a bit of green growth. And the cheatgrass was already dead, and so it burned the cheatgrass, but it burned up through the green growth underneath, burning all of the litter from last year.
Yeah, we were stomping on it, and the smoke was coming out like 4 or 5 feet away from it.
Yeah.
Because the fire, because it was kind of coming back,
Yeah.
I mean, stomping on it.
So, even in a well-developed area, because that's a very well-established community or neighborhood, you can have fire spread very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So, just because there's a map that shows there are spots here of lower risk, yes, it's lower risk, but that doesn't mean that you won't have a fire go through there.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I'm gonna bring in some of my claims experience. I had a client where his house, the house next door to him caught fire, and it damaged his house, the house across the street, the house kitty corner, and another house just from the heat. And it started those houses on fire. Provo City was busy fighting the fire for quite a while because of one house catching fire that was under construction. So,
Yeah, you're
I
gonna,
mean,
you're gonna lose control of the whole
and this is an area where the houses
neighborhood.
are further apart than they are on the north end of town, and those houses are stacked in. Having those sprinklers will help mitigate the potential for it spreading from one house to the next, if we can knock it down quick and get it taken care of, because 15 minutes in, if you had a fire and you didn't have sprinklers, 15 minutes, that house is gonna be fully engulfed with the new modern construction on it. I mean, everything they trained us on, that's what they say. I mean, it's, now if it was a 150-year-old home, it probably wouldn't, because the materials that they use back then don't burn as quick as all the synthetic stuff that's in these homes now, so.
That same situation, the guys that finally got there to fix the fence this week, when I was up there showing, I was looking down, and I think that would have happened now. You'd have probably had a couple homes up above me gone, and it would have been just going west. Or if we had a little more wind that day, or whatever.
So the point of the sprinkler system in that area is to prevent the fire in the home from
Yeah,
starting.
you're not gonna.
To spreading in the first place, to
Trying
keep
to
it
prevent the
contained.
neighbor from welding.
The quicker you
Yeah,
contain it,
The
right?
thing of weeds.
Yeah.
No, you got that, sorry, you're not gonna.
I don't know,
What are you gonna
But-
do, right?
what I see here is
Because
that
it won't stop the fire from coming from the
yeah.
outside.
I see an opportunity here that if you do the WUI boundary encompassing the entire city, you couple that with an effort to update the wildland urban interface code and develop your community wildfire prevention plan, because that has to be done. You have the opportunity here to bring the entire community together and develop this plan and the code so that it can meet pretty much everybody's needs. And you have the opportunity to build the spirit of community, and rather than running the risk of maybe mandating something that people won't understand.
Okay.
I think we ought to let Seth redraw the lines. He drew the original lines. He can take and assess it. He's got the experience and the knowledge.
And we approve it?
And then we approve it after. Yeah, we approve it, and then we still send it to the State Forestry Division, where they're gonna review it and either accept, modify, or
Sounded
reject
not
it.
like what they were gonna look for is if we missed a place, not as
Yeah.
much as we put too
Right.
much in.
Yeah, they're probably gonna look,
They're more concerned about.
they're gonna take our map, overlay it onto this map, and see
Right.
if we missed a high-risk area.
That's what.
That's what they'll do, or something like that.
Well,
So-
and then I'd like to see a copy of whatever WUI code you're thinking about, and on being circulated. So I can see it, see if it's, because obviously me and Shay are looking at two different codes.
All right, so it sounds like we got a couple things to do here. One, we ought to probably get a recommendation from the fire department, right, stating what the boundary should be. That should come to city council for approval. I don't think we have to have any public hearing on it, or nothing like that. We can just adopt that boundary, right? We've already done the ordinance, we just make the boundary, right? That's all we know right now, right? Then we can send that off to the forestry service, the state forestry.
DNR.
Right, and they'll take care of that. Then what we need to do is sit down and start looking at the actual ordinance, building codes for that area, and see where we wanna update it, and if there's areas where we wanna beef it up, create a higher standard for those particular areas. Is that fair enough?
And I'll give you,
Okay.
So that would probably be Shay mostly on the latter to adjust any building code with, in conjunction, of course, with whoever
Yeah,
you
just send
want.
me a copy of it.
When
I
you-
want Seth to go through it too.
So when you start developing that code, I would recommend adding on, putting together a citizen committee to work on the CWPP. Excuse me. And because as you develop that plan really will become the way you're going to implement this code.
Yeah. Because that
Especially-
code also includes defensible areas and things like that.
Yeah,
Vegetation.
now, the code itself may not be retroactive,
Right.
but the CWPP essentially fills in that gap, if you will, because then you're going to take these established spaces and start doing the fuel modification, creating defensible spaces, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And I think they should be developed together, or at least in conjunction with each other, because I think as you develop both of them, and as you try to make them work together, you will more easily find those parts of the code, you say, oh, we don't want this, and we do want that.
So the way I look at this is that although the building code adjustments and all the code adjustments and the establishment of the zones are related, we're not bound, we're not tied together. So we can move forward on the boundary.
Yeah.
We should move forward on the boundary. I'd like to see that on the agenda next time. If we can get a recommendation from the,
I'll talk to Seth.
from Seth.
I don't think
Is that
that would
okay?
be hard to
Yeah.
do.
We should see that next
makes
time.
sense.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the code, we start working on it now, I believe.
Well,
The
once,
code will have to go
The code,
through
yeah,
go
we'll
through
just
the
need to
planning
start.
commission.
planning commission, we'll go through that, right? And
We're
we'll have
gonna
that
lean
public
on
hearing.
your expertise.
Well, I mean,
You understand
there's a
some of
difference
that code
between
too,
what Shay's looking at,
Well,
what I
so-
dealt with.
The difference, I think, Jared, is the Forest Service, the State Forest Service said Utah County's code is much more stringent and strict than the state code.
Apparently, yes.
So,
Well, and part of it.
So that's what I'm saying is if we're gonna, we need to decide what code you want to implement.
That's gonna take longer.
Yeah.
That'll take a little longer, right? Because you're gonna have to go through planning.
It may
commission,
not have
public
to.
hearing.
I mean, you may just say, let's adopt the state.
Yeah, and that may be
Yeah.
the result, right? Now, you've already brought up some of this anyway. You've
Yeah,
already talked some of this last time.
and part of this too, just to let you know, I met with the county about this, or, well, I talked to them on the phone, and they specifically in their code do not allow fire hydrants and fire systems out in the county. If somebody wants to put one personally in their, wants to put a pump in and stuff,
Yeah.
but they have specifically basically outlawed that. And so because of that, they've had,
You gotta
it
implement on
forced
that.
them to go to a stricter
Yeah.
code.
Yeah, some
But it was
cities
because
like
they knew
that.
that land would be annexed into cities.
And then
and
that
they-
leads the state.
That's what-
That's what happened.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else? I think we probably whacked this horse enough. Got this one down? You'll get us a recommendation from
I'll
Seth.
talk to Seth, yep.
We'll make sure that's on the agenda next time. It should be a quick approval. Anything else? Let's go home.